All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee. Happy Valentine's Day. I appreciate everyone's tolerance in starting 15 minutes later, and I think people have Valentines on their desks, so enjoy. We are going to start with HB 323 from our colleague Delegate Guyton, Environment Commission on Climate Change, Membership Edition. If you have any panelists you want to bring up, Delegate Guyton, feel free. Make sure you identify yourself when you sit down, panelists.
Center chair, please.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, members of my wonderful ENT committee. I'll wait for the murmuring on this side to stop before I give you my This is actually, so for the record, Delegate Michelle Guyton, District 42 and B in Baltimore County. This is actually my first bill hearing in ENT since I have been on ENT. I know, right? Since I've been on ENT, it's kind of remarkable. So I appreciate having the opportunity to present this one to you. And in the interest of very, very responsible sponsorship, what I want to say is I thank you for your consideration and a favorable report of House Bill 323 that adds the PSC to the CCC and has already passed EEE. For people watching, I'll just say a little more. The request is being made on behalf of the chair of the Public Service Commission. And although the work of the Public Service Commission intersects with the Commission on Climate Change, and they are already involved in many of the work groups that are being done through the Climate Change Commission, they're not actually a voting member. So this limits their ability to share information and provide feedback on recommendations to move us toward our clean energy goals in Maryland. This bill is cross-filed by Chair Feldman in the Senate. Again, has already passed the Senate committee. It did have one amendment, which you have in your possession, I hope, which actually added also the Secretary of the Department of Emergency Management to the group. And I believe the reason for that was to make sure the numbers weren't even. Is that accurate? Yes. Okay. So thank you for your consideration of House Bill 323 as amended by the Senate. And I ask for a favorable report.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Fred Hoover, the chair of the Maryland Public Service Commission. I want to thank Delegate Guyton for both introducing the bill and giving a very excellent explanation of what the bill is intended to do and the changes that were made in the Senate. With me is a newest member of the Public Service Commission, Commissioner Kumar Barve. And we have been hard at work on issues related to climate change. And as was mentioned by the sponsor, the commission has participated in the activities of the Climate Commission, but we do not have a formal vote. And we just felt that we could be better in our participation in the Climate Commission if we actually could have a vote. There may be situations where we need to recuse ourselves because there are matters that the Climate Commission considers that may come before us as the commission, but I think that'll be easy enough for us to do. And with that, I echo the sponsor's request for a favorable report.
Hi, my name is Kumar Barve. I'm a recovering politician.
Anything else you want to add?
Not really.
Do we have any questions? We're lighting up the red like Valentine's Day here. Delegate Otto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just understand it's her first bill before our committee, and that's great. And I presume this bill is just adding members to an existing commission.
That's correct. Yeah, the Climate Commission has been in effect for a number of years and has a full complement of folks. A lot of them are state departments, and we'd just be another addition to it.
Sounds like good additions. Thank you.
You know, I thought you were pranking Commissioner Barve. I didn't realize you were pranking Delegate Guyton. Does anybody have an actual question? Delegate Ciliberti.
You, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, how much do you miss us?
So much that I use this as an excuse to come and visit you.
Okay.
Commissioner, in 2017, I had HB 483 before this committee and you gave it an unfavorable report. Can you explain why?
Yeah, it was the fault of my vice chairman.
All right, seeing no other questions, we do thank you all. We do have one more favorable witness, Chaz Eby from the Maryland Department of Emergency Management.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee, and especially Delegate Guyton for the invitation to speak. My name is Chaz Eby. I'm the Deputy Secretary of the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. Climate change is changing the disaster landscape nationwide. We're seeing more extreme weather leading to bigger disasters, wildfires out west, extreme heat, major hurricane and flooding frequency. There have actually been twice as many billion-dollar disasters adjusted for inflation since 1980. So major disasters increasing, but also micro disasters that are affecting our residents around the state most months of the year. And so we've embraced our role at the Maryland Department of Emergency Management as a coordinating entity. We've been an active member of the Adaptation Response Working Group, which is a working group of the Climate Change Commission for years. We've also recently hired the state's first Chief Resilience Officer and created the state's first Office of Resilience, which will help coordinate the state's climate-informed investments and improving flood and coastal resilience. We're also the lead developer for the state's hazard mitigation plan. So in closing, we're typically thought of as disaster or weather response people for the state. We are those things, but much of our work also surrounds reducing disaster risk, mitigating the consequences of climate change, and building resilience. And so for that reason, I am asking for a favorable report on the bill to become members as amended. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, I do not see any, so thank you all so much. That concludes the bill here on HB 323.
I just want to point out that we did not touch the buttons.
I was going to say, Mr. Chairman, it's good to see you, but I should say, Commissioner, it was great to see you. So we'll now turn to HB 210, Delegate Acevero, Maryland Building Performance Standards, Fossil Fuel Use and Electric Ready Standards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, Delegate Gabriel Acevero here to present House Bill 210, the Maryland Electric Building Standards Act, which is a reintroduction of legislation that I'd introduced, which would essentially require that newly constructed buildings, with some exceptions, meet energy demands without the use of fossil fuel, in line with the Climate Solutions Now Act, which we passed in 2022. Certainly proud of that work, and wanting to build on that, I introduced HB 210 again. And the goal of this legislation is really recognition that as a coastal state, we should certainly be taking as much action as we can to ensure that we're mitigating both emissions, our carbon footprint, as well as the climate crisis. And so this bill would essentially ensure that we are not just, building on the work that we did with the Climate Solutions Now Act, but we're really heeding the calls of both national advocacy groups here in the United States and international groups to ensure that we as a state are doing all that we can. I'll also point out that since the Secretary General of the United Nations have called for greater action by both states and localities, we've seen jurisdictions like Montgomery County joining DC and New York City in working to reduce the use of fossil fuels that contribute to the climate crisis. In passing this legislation, the Department of Labor would move in adoption of new provisions as part of the Maryland Building Performance Standards, some modified regulations of the International Building Code and International Energy Conservation Code. And while the modification of the regulations is at the discretion of the Department of Labor, this bill establishes a premise that's necessary, and it shall not diminish the availability of affordable housing or the affordability of electricity for consumers in all electric buildings. Again, this bill is about us transitioning, moving away from fossil fuels. I think really as a state that's at the forefront of this climate crisis, we should be doing all that we can. And certainly the passage of this legislation, House Bill 210, the Maryland Building Performance Standards, will help get us there. So with that, I ask for a favorable report, and I really appreciate folks' time in really just continuing the conversation on what we need to do, right? Building on what we've done, but also hopefully getting to the point where we pass a Green New Deal, quite frankly. But coastal states, small island developing states, they are at the forefront of this climate crisis. And we have to start looking at ways to mitigate and address that. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Delegate Acevedo. Are there any questions for the bill sponsor? Okay, I do not see any, so thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Delegate Pippi.
That's all we have time for, Pippi.
Thank you to the
Sure.
sponsor. So I'm just reading through one of the testimonies, and it states that I guess in April, because you mentioned you introduced the bill last year. So since last year in April of 23, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, there was some sort of a disposition there that may impact, I guess, the legality of the bill. And then obviously they attempted to review that in January of 24, and it was reaffirmed. So do you have any comment on whether your bill raises any, constitutional issues or anything like that?
So I didn't see that reference in the DLS report. I'm not familiar with the case that you're referencing, but I'd be happy to take a look and provide an answer, but I'm not familiar with the case, and I don't see that cited in the DLS report. But what the bill essentially does, as I mentioned earlier, is just making sure that we're building on the work that we've already done in terms of that, in terms of transition away from fossil fuels.
Okay, so it looks like it's in the chamber's legislative position in the floor system. So anybody's looking at it. But thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Pippi. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Delegate Acevedo. We have a
Mr.
number
Chair.
of unfavorable in-person witnesses. Mike O'Halarian for MAPTA, Paul Rosenberg for Suburban Propane, Robert Enton for the Maryland Building Industry Association, Lori Graff from the Maryland Building Industry Association, and Tom Ballantyne from NAOP.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'll go ahead and get started while the rest comes up here, just to save the committee a few seconds while I can. For the record, my name is Mike O'Halloran here today, representing the Mid-Atlantic Petroleum Distributors Association and the Mid-Atlantic Propane Gas Association. As you heard from the sponsor, this bill is a reintroduction from last year. I would actually encourage you, if you really want to save some time, to go back and see my testimony from last year. The point is, the Climate Solution Now Act was a very robust piece of legislation that we are still, frankly, dealing with the fallout from. Look no further than many of the task force and working groups that were put forth by the Climate Solutions Now Act have yet to start meeting and sinking their teeth into a lot of the instructions that this body gave them to execute. Suffice to say that passing House Bill 210, I think would be a little premature, particularly before the work of those groups are done. But that is honestly to say nothing of the impact that our industries are making to improve efficiency, lessen their climate impact. Talking about things such as B50 or B100 in our heat oil and propane industries. So again, I appreciate the sponsor's intent. However, we do respectfully request unfavorable report. Thank you.
Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, committee members, thank you for this opportunity to testify on House Bill 210. My name is Paul Rosenberg, and I'm the Senior Manager for Government Affairs and Corporate Communications at Suburban Propane. We're the third largest propane retailer in the nation. In Maryland, we currently have 135 employees at 19 locations, serving more than 40,000 customers. We support Maryland's overall goal of reducing the carbon footprint of buildings. However, the bill clearly prioritizes electricity under the inaccurate assumption that electricity is the energy source with the lowest carbon intensity. Electricity can be a tool in reducing the carbon footprint of buildings, but rapid electrification is detrimental to decarbonization. If buildings move to all electric too quickly, it further taxes an already overburdened electrical grid. More power must be generated, which will most likely come from increased electric generation at existing power plants using fossil fuels, negating any benefit electrification may provide and increasing electricity costs for residents. Meanwhile, other low carbon, carbon neutral, and even carbon negative fuels are already available to consumers and can be used in existing infrastructure, allowing for immediate reductions in carbon emissions. For example, renewable natural gas and renewable propane can be drop-in replacements for natural gas and propane and use existing transmission and distribution systems. Instead of relying solely on electricity, we encourage the state to adopt a more technology neutral approach in reducing carbon emissions, similar to the clean fuel standards adopted in California, Oregon, and Washington for transportation emissions, and permit the use of other lower carbon energy sources. These programs have been very successful. We urge the House Environment and Transportation Committee to amend the bill by adopting such a tech neutral approach. Thank you.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tom Ballantyne. I'm with NIOP Maryland. We're a commercial real estate trade association here in opposition to House Bill 210. While it's less challenging to electrify new construction than existing buildings, there is no off-the-shelf code product available today, and developing a state code that applies a requirement across all building types presents some challenges. The national building and energy codes are developing standards-based approach to low carbon and zero carbon construction. This process will provide building design teams, regulators, and building operators with the technical resources, the recommended practices, and training resources necessary to apply these principles across all types of building and construction. We have seen from the Climate Solutions Now Act a deliberate approach by the General Assembly to look at reports and analysis by various organizations and government entities prior to making final decisions. One of those was instructing the Maryland Codes Administration to make recommendations on an all-electric building code. They have not done so as of yet. This bill would jump ahead of that process. We also note that the bill is loosely modeled after a New York City bill that had a different implementation schedule. That bill recognized some challenges in providing hot water in multifamily and also ordered a report on the use of heat pumps in buildings taller than 7 stories, which is also pending. So for these reasons, we respectfully request your unfavorable report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Lori Graff, CEO of Maryland Building Industry Association. I don't want to be repetitive. Mr. Ballantyne said a lot of things I was going to say. I will point you to the 4th page of the fiscal note where it talks about Climate Solutions Now. I know you guys have heard a lot about that bill. It was a monumental bill at the time, and we're still working through a lot of it. There is a report that is going to be submitted that does exactly what this bill is talking about. So we believe you should work through the process of Climate Solutions Now, we will, happy to work with the committee on that. So with that, we ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just two questions. One is you talk about the difficulty of electrification on the grid, but wasn't there a study on grid electrification as part of the Climate Solutions Now Act? And didn't that study recently come back to say that the grid can handle electrification?
I am not aware of that report, no.
Okay. Thank you. And the other question, you talk about low and no carbon alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
Are those low and no carbon alternatives, you specifically said carbon, are those also methane free?
Well, for something like renewable propane, that's not methane.
Okay, but that does have climate impact. I mean, we're still talking about burning fossil fuels. Is that?
No, renewable propane is not it's made from waste. It could be made from dairy manure. It can come from food waste.
And that doesn't have any climate impact gases.
I would say I'm saying that it is a much lower carbon intense fuel.
And methane as well?
As for, you mean renewable natural gas, it is methane generated from waste, but when it's created. So I don't know, Delegate, if you're familiar with carbon intensity scores. So, you know, 0 means carbon neutral. Generally, gasoline and diesel have a CI score of around 100. The California Air Resources Board put RNG as having a CI score with a range depending on the fuel pathway. It can have a score as low as -532 because you're taking emissions that would have been emitted from, say, dairy manure, and you're converting it into energy. So you're essentially taking those emissions away from the equation.
Okay, I would need to see data on that, but thank you.
Any further questions for this panel? Okay, thank you all. That
Thank you,
concludes
sir.
the bill hearing on HB 210. We will now turn to our colleague Delegate Terrassa, HB 357, Agriculture, Confinement of Egg-Laying Hens and Commercial Egg Production Prohibitions. Please bring up a panel if you have them.
Maybe you guys can switch. Okay. My panel's too big. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a minute here. Good afternoon, Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and esteemed members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. For the record, I'm Jen Terrassa, Delegate Jen Terrassa. Thank you for this opportunity to present HB 357, which seeks to end the practice of confining egg-laying hens in inhumane battery cages. So what's the problem we're trying to solve here? We all love eggs. I had them for breakfast today and yesterday. But current law does not regulate the size of cages that chickens are kept in. Millions of egg-laying chickens in Maryland are kept in cages their whole life, and if that's not bad enough, there's no limit on the size of the cage they're kept in. So what does this amount to in reality? Currently, many egg-laying hens are confined in cages that are generally only a few feet across and barely a foot and barely a foot and a half tall. The amount of room in these battery cages is insufficient for a single chicken, but often there are as many as 10 chickens stuffed into this narrow cage. So I have a quick video that I'll just keep talking while you see that. But just to give you an idea of the size of the cages that they're typically kept in, this gives each chicken approximately this much space. And that's not even a requirement. I think I have a video about to start. And this will just show you what this looks like on the ground. These cool cages, I think one's coming. Looks like it is. I'll just keep talking in the interest of time and hopefully you'll see that. But these cruel cages are so cramped that hens are deprived basic ability to not only move around, but they can't spread their wings or engage in normal chicken behavior. The inability to move and function normally creates psychological stress for these birds, which can manifest in self-pecking behavior and increase rates of painful osteoporosis. And these side effects create a weakened hen that is still expected to produce the same amount of eggs. Additionally, it is this very same space that hens are forced to both lay eggs and defecate in. This unsanitary nature of this practice increases salmonella risk. So what does this bill do? HB 357 requires egg-laying hens to be housed in cage-free housing systems after a phase-out period. Cage-free housing can be indoors or outdoors where the hens are free to roam or to roam unrestricted, and hens are provided the opportunity to exhibit natural behaviors using scratch areas, perches, nest boxes, and dust bathing areas. The bill allows farmers to install a variety of aviary options. It also requires that there be a modest 1 square foot per bird. And just to give you some idea, this is 1 square foot. Actually, this is just under 1 square foot. And this is just over. So just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. And who does this apply to? The bill only applies to Maryland farm owners or operators who own at least 3,000 egg-laying hens, which means farmers with fewer than 3,000 egg-laying hens are exempt. The policy only applies to egg-laying hens. It excludes broiler chickens. So to be clear, this does not cover meat chickens who are already cage-free. So just really quickly, in terms of amendments, I have been working on a technical amendment with a Senate cross-file sponsor and stakeholders that will clarify the exemption language for small producers and the definition of sale. And also, I just want to make quick mention of the fiscal note. I realize the fiscal note calls for several $100,000 in expenditures, but we've been in conversations with MDA to clarify the intention for this is to be done as part of existing inspections and certifications. So we're willing to put an amendment to clarify that. And that should address MDA's concerns around the cost implementation, which should reduce the fiscal note significantly. I just also want to mention one last thing here, that the current industry trend, this is not new ground. This isn't breaking new ground. The largest shell egg producer, and according to their test is, I don't remember how to pronounce this, Issei, sorry, my apologies. And according to their testimony, they started transitioning into cage-free infrastructure after an outbreak of avian flu in 2022. Also, 11 states ban the use of cage-free eggs. Ban the use of cages for egg laying, sorry. And 8 of those 11 banned the sale of any of those eggs from cage facilities. In addition, 200 of the largest food corporations have committed to using cage-free eggs in their production supply, including brands like McDonald's and Burger King. So in conclusion, polling shows that 3/4 of Marylanders support cage-free. HB 357 takes a balanced approach to end cruel treatment of hens while still allowing egg producers to operate successfully. It's time for Maryland to create a more humane egg industry and do its part to make cage-free eggs available and affordable. I respectfully urge a favorable report. Or did you guys have an order?
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Holbein. I'm with the Humane Society of the United States in support of HB 357, which provides common sense protections for egg-laying hens and ensures safer eggs at more affordable prices for Maryland families. As you'll hear from others, birds suffer immensely in egg factory farms that use cages. But caging birds poses problems not only for animal welfare, but for public health as well. The nation's top food safety organization, the Center for Food Safety, has concluded that cage confinement increases the risk of salmonella contamination compared to cage-free production. And the egg industry's own publication wrote on its cover, "Salmonella thrives in cage housing." According to the FDA, salmonella is the leading cause of hospitalizations and death from food poisoning. This all makes logical sense. Hens who are caged so tightly they can barely move on feces-encrusted wire are more likely to become stressed and sick and transmit dangerous bacteria like salmonella. What's important to note is that this measure will make more humane, safer eggs more affordable for Maryland families. That's because grocery stores currently charge an artificial premium for cage-free eggs because they know that some customers will pay more. This artificial premium creates a two-tiered system where lower-income customers are pushed into buying substandard eggs. But by requiring cage-free as a new baseline, as this bill does, that artificial premium will no longer be applicable, making it easier for all Marylanders to afford safer eggs that accord with their values. HB 357 would simply require egg producers to follow the egg industry's own cage-free guidelines, which are better for animals and better for Maryland families. Thank you for your consideration.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Dr. Carrie Waters. I'm a veterinarian, a Virginia Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine graduate, and I'm licensed to practice veterinary medicine in Maryland. I have a PhD in physiology, and I'm board certified in veterinary internal medicine. I have served as the Maryland representative of the Humane Society Veterinary Medical Association for over 3 years. A wealth of scientific research proves the adverse effects of extreme confinement systems like battery cages used to house and restrict egg-laying hens. Cage systems damage both the physical and the psychological well-being of birds, and these confinement methods also create significant public health concerns. The Pew Commission on Industrial Farm Animal Production found unequivocally that confining egg-laying hens in cages prevents them from moving naturally and constitutes inhumane treatment. In light of such compelling evidence, the Pew Commission recommended the phasing out of battery cages. Recent studies show that cage-free hens are healthier compared to their cage counterparts. They have less disease, healthier guts, and lower carcass condemnation rates. They also have significantly better welfare scores, including increased social interactions, less severe feather pecking, and decreased stress-related gene expression. So I respectfully ask the committee to vote yes on HB 357, protecting egg-laying hens in Maryland by eliminating the use of inhumane cage confinement and ensuring a more humane, safer, and sustainable food system. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michelle Waldman, and first of all, happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I am the president and founder of Rosie's Farm Sanctuary. It is an animal sanctuary in Potomac. We provide tours to the community, to schools, and to groups. And we had thousands of visitors last year, and we reach upwards of 1 million people on social media every month. We have rescued farm animals, including egg-laying hens. And I gotta say, I love our hens. They are so misunderstood by human beings. My girls are silly and playful and adventurous and curious, affectionate, and smart. They can recognize 100 faces, and they have well-developed language. They also have best friends. So throughout the day, they come together and they talk, and they sound like a bunch of ladies in a hair salon. And I swear they gossip about me when I leave their coop. Confining birds like this to battery cages is unnecessarily cruel. It grossly impacts their physical and their mental well-being, and it impedes them from being able to follow through on their natural instincts. I honestly cannot imagine my hens spending their entire existence in a cage where they can only live on a size of paper this big, unable to spread their wings or to even turn around. It's honestly barbaric. My girls spend their day running and jumping and perching and spreading their wings. They love to roll around in the dirt. It's called dust bathing, and it helps them get rid of parasites. Hens spend 60% of the time foraging, looking for insects and seeds. They do this whether or not we feed them. It's a naturally honed instinct developed over millions of years. They can't do this in a cage. They can't even turn around. To be completely honest, this bill is the bare minimum of what we owe them. Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have one more witness for the panel.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Bevan Dangle. I'm the State Director for the Humane Society of the United States here in Maryland. I do want to speak to some of the work that we've been doing, especially on the Senate side, to try to get closer to where our industry opposition wants to see this bill. It's really important to put this in context. This bill is passed in 11 states. It is fully operational in 5. In none of those states have we seen sort of the shocks that are feared to happen here. And it is really important also, as we talk about egg prices, that we're constantly parsing out those studies to say, is this an avian flu induced price hike, which we're all incredibly sympathetic to, or is this truly the result of some of these cage-free laws? The avian flu price impacts are significant, but across the board, the cage-free reforms have not had that type of impact on the market. And when we're talking about the cost to producers, it's important to keep in mind that the industry's own studies give very significant ranges. The study relied on by the Farm Bureau that quotes a much higher number, that same study also says that producers estimate cage-free transition can be as low as 8%. So we understand the fear of the uncertainty, but this is something that Maryland is drastically behind on. We've been trying to work on amendments to mitigate some of these concerns. As I said, we have really brought down, and these are Senate amendments, but I believe the sponsor submitted them here as well. We've significantly brought down the fees and fines that we acknowledge that was, drafted very out of line with existing fees and fines in our statutes. We're streamlining the enforcement provision, both to minimize interruptions on the growers. They don't need MDA trumping around, especially with avian flu, any more than necessary. So we're bringing that back and making it very agency driven. And we are very happy, we are willing to accept, I don't want to be too strong about it because most states have a 4-year phase in, but we are willing to accept the 2030 deadline, which ESA has referred to as critical for them. Our goal is to get chickens out of cages, not to get farmers out of business. So we urge a favorable report.
Thank you. Delegate Tarassa is the virtual witness on your panel?
Yes.
Okay. You bring her up, Jacob. Sarah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Members of the committee, I'm Dr. Sarah Shields. I am an animal behavior.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, hold on one second. Is that on our end or on Jacob? No, that doesn't help Delegate Foley. Sarah, can you just try to speak really loudly?
Can you hear me? Yes, I can speak loudly, but can you hear me?
We can hear your voice is just very faint, so we just want to make sure we actually hear what you're saying.
Okay, I'll try to speak loud. Okay. Members of the committee, I'm Dr. Sarah Shields. I'm an animal behavior scientist, and I studied at the University of California at Davis. I am now the director of Farm Animal Welfare Science at Humane Society International. We strongly support HB 357. Animals have deeply ingrained biological drives to express certain types of natural behavior, and this is well documented in the scientific literature. A hen needs a perch for roosting at night, an enclosed nesting space for egg laying, and loose litter for pecking, scratching, and dust braving. Restriction of movement in cages has real physical consequences on the health of the hens, including bone weakness from lack of exercise and poor plumage condition from abrasion against the bars of the cage. Animals are built to move, and they suffer if they can't. As producers have gained more experience with cage-free housing, the few remaining obstacles have been addressed. Hen health is good in these systems, and the mortality is low. The most recent meta-analysis, which is cited in my written testimony, included over 6,000 flocks and shows that mortality in cage-free is as low as it ever was in cages. Productivity is good in these systems, and I provided USDA data in my written testimony to demonstrate this point. Cage-free hens are no more susceptible to avian influenza or other zoonotic diseases than caged hens. Cage-free doesn't mean outdoor free-range access. The hens can be kept completely indoors with industry-standard biosecurity. In fact, the conversion to cage-free is an opportunity to move those old battery cage facilities into improved and upgraded biosecurity with facility improvements. So in summary, these birds are definitively better off in a cage-free environment. There is no question about this, and the humane option is to advance HB 357. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for this panel, Delegate Otto?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was stated there's 11 states that have adopted this. How does their legislation vary from what we had before us? Does substantially similar or?
Yes, in all of the states, except for Ohio, they are virtually identical. Ohio's ban had a phase out of certain kinds of cages, similar intent, but the rest of them are basically identical.
And that means there's 39 states that haven't addressed this. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
What are these 11 states? Do you have that in your testimony?
Yeah,
Something that I can look that up?
Yeah, be happy to provide you a list, but it includes Michigan and California and Ohio, all significant egg producing states, includes Massachusetts, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, Washington, Oregon. I get to 11 there? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along similar lines, again, this is, a
a massive transition. I think that's the kind of the vibe I'm getting from both people in support of and opposed to this bill. Is there any analog that you can describe in preferably in food or agriculture, but is there any sort of similar transition that's happened in recent years that we've had to go through similar to this?
I can't think of a perfect,
But if I could just mention, Mr. Chairman, there's already a significant number of egg laying producers basically starting to do this anyway. So while it is a big transition, it is a transition that's kind of underway.
and just to echo that, yeah, we're at about 40% of the egg market is cage free right now. And everyone, producers, the Humane Society predicts that will greatly continue. So it really is a matter of time before the whole egg industry is cage free. But it's important to get there as quickly as possible, both for animals and for food safety.
Got it. Thank you.
Delegate Jacobs.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Isn't it true that the cage-free operations require more water, feed, and land to run that operation?
The land difference is pretty negligible, and they have and if you think about in terms of a broiler farm or a chicken meat farm, all those birds are on the floor. And so in a cage-free facility, they also have vertical access. They have perches and ramps they go up on. So it's not even one-to-one. It's less space per bird than what you would see in a broiler meat facility. And also the numbers of chickens used for egg-laying hens is much smaller than the number of broilers. So the impact would be pretty negligible on a land use. On feed, slightly more feed, but it's basically they might require slightly more feed just because they're moving around. And I think it would be a terrible injustice for us to try and save feed on animals by basically immobilizing them in cages so small they can't move.
Well, I just want to verify the fact that it does require more land, more feed, and more water.
Slightly. And
to transition from cage-free, from cage to cage-free. I just want to verify that fact.
Yes, slightly.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So, we just talked in an earlier bill here about the carbon footprint, but based on those facts.
Would you be able to talk right into the mic? I'm having a lot of trouble hearing you. My apologies.
Excuse me.
That's much better.
But based on that fact, you actually got a higher carbon footprint raising cage-free eggs than you do caged eggs. If it's in fact, and you agree to it, that it requires more water, feed, and land, then doesn't that at the same time have a higher carbon footprint in the cage-free operation?
Very, very negligibly, but yeah, perhaps. And the costs right now, though, are being borne to these animals who are suffering and also at higher food safety risk. But Dr. Shields, did you want to offer any thoughts on this?
Yeah, if it's okay, I would be happy to. I think there are ways that we can mitigate that very.
Get her to speak in the microphone.
Her turning up her volume doesn't do anything. That just makes it so she'll hear us louder. Can you just try to talk as loud as possible? Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, absolutely. There are ways to mitigate that very, very slight increase in greenhouse gas emissions. There's ways to mitigate it with the manure handling, the manure management, or the way that the feed is sourced, which is the most important contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. If you source it from a more green facility, from more green production conditions, then you can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And what some cage-free producers are doing is they're adding solar panels to the house so that they can be both green and humane. So there's ways to address that. And you also have to compare it to other food items that we produce. There's just the greenhouse gas emissions of egg production is already very, very low. So you're not talking about a very big increase at all. And if you compare it with some of the plant-based options, I mean, the other option that consumers always have are to make a choice not to buy eggs and to buy a product that is much, much lower in greenhouse gas emissions instead.
Well, thank you for the testimony. I couldn't hear it, but anyhow.
We'll get to the video, Delegate Jacobs.
Maybe I can get to the video, but based on your testimony, you talked about, was it 40% consumer demand? Is that what you said earlier?
We're close to 40% of the national egg flock being cage-free now.
And so, you know, if that's where the consumer request is going, if that's where we're going with this, don't you think the egg producers are going that direction?
They are largely going in that direction. I think legislation, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, my point is, if it's true that 40% are, that's the demand now, and they're actually, the producers are going in that direction, why would we need the legislation? Isn't it consumer driven?
Consumers do have a role in this, and consumers, there's a few factors at play. One, a lot of consumers don't realize they're getting caged eggs. They see things like grade A or farm fresh on the carton, and they think they're buying cage free, but they aren't. You know, we think there is a legislative place for saying that a practice is so cruel, such as immobilizing a bird in a cage, that it is worth the legislature stepping in. And, you know, and companies are doing it, and legislators are moving in this direction because it's a cruel it's a cruel use of equipment that needs to end. I also just back to your former point about I encourage you to take a look at the Friends of the Earth testimony, which strongly states that this is the right move.
Well, you know, just to give a little history, I'd like to do a little history, you know. But my family, you know, one side of my family, we're all farmers, and they like Vaughn, he likes these stories. But you know, one side of my family were farmers, and they had laying hens. And one of the problems with laying hens, and they were cage free, they were running around the farm and, you know, did their thing. You had to run around, try to find the eggs for one thing, clean them because they were always dirty. But we had a problem with chicken hawks, foxes, weasels in the wintertime. The weasels would kill them right in the nest while they were laying eggs because they were living in this open environment. But, you know, because they're cage free doesn't make their life like without these things happening to them. So it's not that I can't say that one's really better than the other. It's you know, the dangers do exist no matter what. But as long as we have a safe and ample food production, I just don't get the idea of why we need legislation that's for something that's consumer driven. Isn't that so?
I do want to, for the clarity of the committee, that's a pasture raised scenario. My chickens run free, they get eaten by foxes, and then we put them back in a run because we realized that was a bad idea. But what we're talking about here is still an enclosed environment. We're talking aviary systems, so they will be safe from the chicken hawks, Delegate.
Delegate Ziegler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For anyone on the panel, do you have any idea of what we're talking about in terms of number of commercial laying operations in Maryland that are large enough to be subject to this law?
Yeah, so there's about 11, according to MDA analysis, there's 11 growers who hit that 3,000 bird threshold. So while the vast majority of our growers in the state are under that threshold, the vast majority of our eggs come from that smaller universe of growers.
And are they in supermarkets, or do they get sold to larger companies like McDonald's or what have you?
So there's two primary more corporate entities who sort of aggregate the eggs and then sell them on to those sources, McDonald's or Weiss or Giant. Sauder, who it's very worth noting is a Maryland-based company and has not commented with any concern on this bill. And then Issei, who I believe you'll hear from today.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So my point really is that this is not about small farmers in Maryland.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Aren't all eggs USDA inspected, regardless if they're caged or uncaged?
They are, but there has long been an issue with salmonella in egg production. It's not just about the fecal matter getting on the cells or on the eggs. It's a matter of the salmonella existing within the bird and then being in the actual laid egg. So I remember a few years ago, the FDA had a headline on their webpage that essentially said that salmonella from eggs is a significant issue. And there's different ways to go at that problem, but one of them is to get animals out of these cages so they can be healthier and have more robust immune systems.
Well, how many salmonella egg cases do we have in Maryland?
I don't have data on that, but we can look into it.
Okay, then I would wonder, when you talk about the footprint that Delegate Jacobs referring to, if all these eggs, all these chickens are in cages, then you spread them out on the floor. Do you have a mathematical number of how many more square feet we need in a normal condition for these eggs? I mean, we talk about carbon footprint, we worry about feces and things like that. So how many more square feet do the producers have to come up with in order to meet your requirement or your request? I should put it that way.
So because I'm math impaired, I will go back to visuals. I think the delegate showed at the start, the difference is from, that one piece of paper of size per bird to just the slightly larger binder size. And because you can still have the aviary systems, this is in our testimony, so I apologize, it's hard to see. But you still have these aviary systems where you've got vertical space. So it's not that we're taking stacked cages and spreading the birds out and having to double the size of the enclosure. Because of the vertical space issue, you're able to still have the birds able to move up and count towards those space requirements. So again, the size differential is not significant.
So we're doing something instead of by the square foot, we're doing by the cubic foot.
Yes, delegate.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, this could be to you or to your panel. So I'm just looking at some informational testimony from the Maryland Veterinary Medical Association. And I just want to read it real quick to get your thoughts on what they've said here. So it said a couple things. They said, one, the Maryland Veterinary Medical Association wishes to make clear that there is no scientific body of evidence to suggest that cage-free eggs are more nutritious, safer, carry less foodborne pathogen risk, or are necessarily more humane. They also go on further down in here to say that birds are actually significantly more likely to fall ill and die from diseases when housed in more natural environments. So I just wanted to get everyone's thoughts on that. Are they not being truthful with us? Are the vets lying here to us, or what are we to believe here?
Within the animal welfare space, AVMA, the national organization, and state VMAs are highly controversial. The reason is because of their extensive financial ties to industry. And basically, these state VMAs and the national AVMA are largely rubber stamps for agribusiness. They never side against agribusiness, no matter how cruel the issue is. A lot of their statistics, I'm sorry you can't hear Dr. Shields, but she is in her written testimony gone through many of those and talked about how current studies show that those claims are outdated or inaccurate. And I think when you look at groups that don't have these financial ties to industry, the humane groups of the world that are looking just to make, cause animals less suffering. There's universal agreement. The cage-free is definitively better.
I guess if I may add to the MDVMA did not come out against this bill. They said they were simply monitoring it. So they weren't opposing it. They were monitoring it.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I recognize it's informational testimony, but that's like, it's pretty clear what they're saying there with respect to the bill. So, I mean, we have them in the committee frequently testifying on all kinds of other topics like rabies and things like that. Should we not believe them on those topics as well when they come in and tell us about the seriousness of those kinds of issues also?
Well, I think if they were to look at the most recent evidence, the preponderance of evidence, they would adjust their stance. Because I don't think if you look at the AVMA, for example, they rely on information from 2012 and earlier. They don't have any of the newer studies in their database reflecting the sea change that has occurred over the years, not only with many more producers changing to cage-free, but also there have been numerous studies as more and more of these systems come into place, showing improved production, improved health of the hens, and also improved criteria for public health.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a ton of questions, but I'm going to be brief. Some of them were already answered. I want to address this affects hen houses essentially that are 3,000 hens or more. And to your testimony, that's about 11 in the state.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes.
It's millions of birds, but it's 11 houses.
That's the point I'm getting to. Okay. So if there were 2,500, this would not affect those individuals. And so you're saying for whatever reason, 2,500 hens don't have the same effect in your, I guess, movement to have, I can't even say cage-free, less confinement than something 3,000 and over when we're talking about 500 less hens.
3,000 is the number that exists in the other state bills, and we do want this to be as consistent a regulatory framework as possible. So that's why we're sustaining that 3,000 number. So that's where that comes from.
And I just want to make a point about using cage-free language versus confinement. I know the bill title is confinement, but there has been a thrown around cage-free. So this is not really necessarily cage-free. It's just less confined.
So to be clear, because this question came up in the Senate as well, and we apologize that there is that bit of confusion. The birds under this law could not be in cages. They can't be slightly larger cages. They can't be, cages with a treat stick hanging in the middle. It is requiring this conversion to this aviary style. So they are contained. They are not going outside. They are not getting eaten by the hawks, but they are not in cages.
The bill says cage-free housing system.
Yes.
Okay. And so you quoted 40% nationally, the market is essentially cage-free. What is it for the state of this state?
We don't know
Don't
precisely.
know. Okay.
That's
okay.
because the data is not publicly available.
And we don't know salmonella cases in Maryland as well.
No, I don't think it's broken down
It's
though.
no. And then I had another question in a flyer that I received. It says boost the economy by potentially creating a host of jobs. With a business-friendly regulatory scheme, this bill opens up Maryland for new opportunities for constructing cage-free facilities that would create jobs. This bill could lead to employment for construction workers, electricians, excavators, engineers, and farm workers. Can you explain that?
We did not disseminate that, so I can't speak to the author's intent.
It's from the Humane Society of the United States.
Oh,
It's on this flyer.
my apologies. As you see, we have too many flyers. So there's two pieces at work here. One is that we know these transitions, as you transition over from the battery cage to the aviary style, as Issei has rightly said, open up opportunities for that construction as you just mentioned. Now that is the cages have to be turned over every 10 to 20 years anyway. So that's why we hope with a longer implementation timeline, this can be a win-win across both sides. We also know as the market is moving increasingly cage-free, the ability to operate in states where that is a consistent requirement across all growers does open up opportunities for growers who want to be ahead of that market and utilizing the number of corporate pledges to become cage-free. So it is, we understand again the concerns that the growers are raising, but we do see this as a way to ensure that our farmers stay competitive and that we're even encouraging new farmers to come into the market here.
And so to follow up on that, do you know in our state, how many of these hen laying facilities are new within the last 5 years? And I ask that because there is a financial cost. And so if I'm a new hen laying facility and maybe I'm at 3,000 and I've just bought all of this equipment and you're asking me to transfer in 5 years, I don't know the loan that they have put out, for instance, on that equipment. And so are there any considerations for the loans that are these farmers potentially are taking out would then have to transfer, right? So there's a cost on cost, right? So that loan's not paid off, but now I have to get another loan to potentially turn over these houses into a different type of facility. Has there been considerations about that?
Certainly, that's why we were willing to accept the much longer on-ramp of the 6 years. We're sort of trusting to Issei's written testimony that 2030 is feasible. So we're hoping that that wouldn't be a situation that would hit anyone. And we are continuing to have conversations internally around how do we make sure that we don't have any, single sort of solitary farmer in that position. We just haven't quite figured out the way to protect, all interests at the table, but that is a factor we're willing to continue to talk about.
And then, Mr. Chair, if I may, one last question, as this is an interesting conversation, but and I guess the other question I would have is in that same vein, I'm gonna save those. Oh yes, export. Can you talk about the exports? So in other words, if this is a transition we're making in the state, exporting into the state, or would be a same requirement that those eggs being exported in the state would also have to be quote unquote cage free?
Yeah, so it's any eggs grown in state or sold in state. And for the export, what's a significant benefit for our growers is that so many of the Pennsylvania companies are making their own cage-free commitments and are telling us they don't even have enough access to cage-free eggs to sort of stay on track with some of their commitments. So,
but I could essentially be still purchasing eggs exported into the state that aren't cage-free. Yes or no?
No. And we do have a definition of one of the clarifying amendments is around that sale, but any eggs sold in Maryland would have to be under this cage-free standard.
Sold in Maryland or sold to Maryland?
Sold for sale in Maryland. So anything
Okay.
that's coming into Maryland to be sold.
Thank you.
Delegate Caton, last question for this.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate this bill. I love animals. There were so many questions that came up around it, and I love the sponsor. So many questions that came up around this bill last year. I feel like I do have a question, and that's about whether or not the Department of Ag has weighed in on this at all. But I also feel like I need to just briefly put in a word for the Veterinary Association, because I wasn't real comfortable with how we were portraying them as somehow financially benefiting from keeping birds in uncomfortable and dangerous situations. So I have worked with them. I have several bills with them this year. I've always found them very credible and very concerned about the welfare of animals. So even when we discussed this bill last year, that was the case. And they were also very strong. I'm surprised we have informational and not an opposition letter from them. So I do feel like I need to say that out loud, because I think that might have been an unfair characterization. But the question is, did the Department of Ag weigh in on this year? Because I don't see anything.
The Department of Agriculture has been neutral on the bill.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Terrassa. And your first panel, we have some additional in-person favorable witnesses if they're here. Lisa Radoff, Maryland Votes for Animals. Ryan Robinson, Compassion in World Farming, and Nancy Perry, ASPCA. And Lisa, why don't you just go ahead and get started?
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee, Lisa Radov, Chair and President of Maryland Votes for Animals. You heard a pretty thorough rundown and excellent points from the last panel, as well as our esteemed sponsor. Thank you, Delegate Terrasa. So I'm not going to belabor this. I do want to just reiterate that when asked in a 2023 YouGov poll, 76% of Marylanders were in favor of making this transition. Only 17% were not supportive of this transition. So I wanted to leave you with that. I also wanted to mention that 18 countries, including those in the European Union and many others, also have cage-free standards. So this is not something that is just in 11 states and nowhere else in the world. So we would be keeping up with that trend. And if I'm not mistaken, the EU is a pretty environmentally friendly group of countries. On that note, I'd like to thank Delegate Terrasa and urge a favorable report for HB 357. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to testify. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. My name is Nancy Perry. I'm Senior Vice President for the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. I live on a small farm on the border of Howard and Montgomery counties. So I'm here both as a Maryland citizen and representing our national organization's 25,000 Maryland citizens and more than 2 million nationwide. We have granted over $1.4 million to Maryland organizations to protect animals in need in a variety of circumstances. But we also believe in investing in changing the policies to prevent harm to animals. And that's why we're here today to urge you to support HB 357. It will improve the welfare for millions of hens. It'll align our state with a broader transition already occurring towards higher welfare farming. And in doing so, ensure our farmers can meet a growing demand for cage-free eggs. It will position them better. And as you've already heard today, the data does show that voters are very concerned about the welfare of farm animals, and that concern has fueled increasing demand for more humane options. It's led to, as you've heard, over 200 companies committing to cage-free systems, from cost-conscious companies like Dollar Tree, Costco, Target, to Maryland-based Sodexo and Marriott. Just last week, McDonald's, using nearly 2 billion eggs a year, announced that all of its US locations are now 100% cage-free, and they did that without raising prices for consumers. The egg industry's own data shows that California egg prices changed by less than 1 penny per egg after implementing this same policy. And the production costs from ag sources say literally pennies per egg. So we're not talking about major costs. There are, as you've heard too, 11 other states that have already passed laws to ban the cruel confinement of hens. We think Maryland should be on this list. Thank you so much for your consideration of this important bill.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Robinson, and I am the Corporate Compliance Manager at Compassion in World Farming. I essentially work with food businesses to establish commitments like the one we're talking about today. A recent survey by a leading industry publication, Supermarket News, found that over 90% of retailers are seeing shopper interest in cage-free eggs. Hundreds of companies across the country have made these pledges, and the vast majority have either reached this 100% cage-free mark or are actively working towards it. There may be a few outliers, just like in any industry, but there are also numerous companies that are switching even faster, just like McDonald's that we've heard just this last week, Walgreens and CVS that also have accomplished that last year. You may hear testimony about a 2023 egg study from those registered in opposition to this bill. In this study, producers estimate cage-free transition costs to be as low as 8%. That's much lower than what some opponents of the bill have claimed in their written testimony, where they erroneously claimed a 41% increase in cost of production. Furthermore, the price results in that study are overstated. The study uses theoretical cost estimates from 2018 and 2021, which predate the effective date of the California legislation that we've already talked about. Supporters of the bill provide an industry report from 2022 that controlled for the spike in the price due to avian influenza and represents a more accurate analysis of the impact cage-free standards, since the industry report notes how when California implemented a nearly identical law, the prices of eggs went only up by about 8 cents per carton. We've talked about Michigan and the Michigan Allied Poultry Industries, who are also in support of their nearly identical bill, once said, "I am here to express our strong support for the bill, which is good sense legislation that produces a first ever cage-free standard that aligns the timing of Michigan's laws for animal housing with the commitments form a majority of our country's leading buyers of eggs." For more information, please check out our written testimony, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this panel? I do not see, Delegate Ziegler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was just curious, there is a piece of testimony in here from Americans for Family Farmers in support of the bill, with about 120 small farms signing on to it. And I was just curious, it seems to me, I mean, I don't sell eggs. I do sell corn, so I was very happy to hear that cage-free chickens would eat more corn. So I feel like as farmers, we're always involved in this race to the bottom where we're trying to make prices for our products cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And I'm not sure why we do that, to be honest with you, but I'm thinking if I were a local farm, I would advertise that I was local and that I was cage-free. So are you seeing smaller, younger farmers coming in with these, like below 3,000 with battery operated cages?
Go ahead.
I do. I almost could walk to, I'm in Baltimore County. There's a farm called Hidden Waters that's very close. That's in our district, Dana, that advertises cage-free, and it's a very small farm. And they absolutely, and they have a pretty loyal following.
No, I mean, I was asking, I can't imagine that a small farm advertising local eggs would have those confinement cages. That
Yeah,
would
they
seem
do
to be
not.
an odd marketing choice to me.
Yes, no, 100% apologies.
Okay.
Yes,
All
yes,
right.
exactly.
Thank you.
No,
Mr.
in
Chair.
fact, Maryland's really progressive in this way. We do have a lot of new farmers coming online and who are making higher welfare farming highly profitable. We actually brought congressional staff on a farm tour this last year to demonstrate that it's very practical to implement these sorts of policies. And we took them to 3 different farms in Maryland, and they were really impressed with what they saw.
Great, thank you. We'll now turn to our in-person unfavorable testimony. We'll call up Christy Scott, EC America, William Dix, EC America, Robert Dvorak, same organization, and Dan Snyder, same organization. Don't worry, Dan Snyder spelled with 2 N's here, so you're okay.
I actually do spell my name with 2 N's, sir.
Yes, I know. That's why I'm not concerned that you're the other Dan Snyder.
There you go. There you go. As mentioned, I'm Dan Snyder. I am the Northeast Regional General Manager for EC America. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the history of egg production here in the United States. So in the 1920s, eggs were produced by nearly half of Americans. However, quality and availability varied due to seasonal production and poor storage. In the 1930s, farmers began moving hens indoors as new research and experience demonstrated benefits in disease and hen health. In the 40s, poultry scientists found favorable results when hens were moved indoors to a cage system. In the 50s, many farmers adopted these cage housing systems. Keeping hens in smaller groups protected them from aggressive hens and allowed equal access to feed and water. Survivability and egg production increased. Neither the hens nor the eggs came in contact with waste. Better egg nutrient quality and less feed usage resulted. In the 50s, improved manure handling and egg collection with conveyor belts, improvements in feed genetics, disease resistance, and flock management were all made. In the 70s, Food Safety Inspection Service implemented the Egg Products Inspection Act, which included inspections of eggs and egg products. In the 80s, more efforts to reduce the risk of Salmonella enteritidis and UEP established the first industry-wide written recommendations for hen care. In 1994, UEP created the 5-star Total Quality Assurance Food Safety Program. In 1999, UEP commissioned an independent scientific advisory committee for animal welfare to identify further research and recommendations on farm care standards. UEP launched the UEP certified guidelines for conventional cage housing in 2002. The vast majority of eggs were still produced as conventional conventional cage housing. The FDA egg safety final rule became effective in 2010, with more practices to push even harder for against salmonella. Today, consumption of eggs in the U.S. is an all-time high. We farmers work to meet the evolving expectation of our customers. I, being a recent escapee from California, request you vote unfavorably for this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. 22 days prior to receiving chicks, those eggs are collected from breeder farms and sent to a hatchery. The eggs are then set in climate-controlled incubators for 21 days. After hatching, they're transported to our growing barns and spend up to 17 weeks there. They receive multiple vaccines for chicken diseases as well as to prevent SE. These pullets are then moved over to the layer house and start laying eggs around 20 weeks of age. The hen production cycle ends between 80 and 90 weeks of age. The aviary model cage-free production is a metal frame structure with a wire mesh floor that provides multiple tiers for hens to perch, drink water, eat food, lay eggs. Hens are able to enter and exit at will. The design is all automated from water supply, computerized temperature control, feedings, egg collection, and manure handling. All this fortified by alarms and emergency generation. Our hatch and fowl schedules are prepared 2 years ahead of chick placements and fowl removals. This is because the industry has a limited supply of breeders on the replacement side and an even more limited resources on the slaughter side. The planning process for construction begins a month or two prior to a fowl removal date. That time is needed to get a demo permit as well as procure vendor and equipment selections. Once the birds are removed, demo process starts, takes about 6 weeks. Once this demo is finished, the debris is cleaned up, the building process can begin. From foundation to bird date is 24 weeks. The process to start the second barn is contingent upon the time it takes to grow the pullets for that barn, plus the demo. So assuming 18 weeks to grow the birds, 6 weeks to do the demo, another 24 weeks. And this process repeats over and over until all the barns are replaced. Given the additional cost to producers and consumers, as well as lack of retail interest, I kindly ask you vote unfavorably for this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and fellow committee members. ESA America has 2.1 million hens. The mandate will cost about $141 million. ESA America currently has 87 employees. 2.6 million bushels of corn produced locally flows through our feed mill in Massey. If passed, ESA America would be unable to provide a staple source of protein to folks who simply want the most affordable product on the shelf. We would be forced out of business, our employees out of work. With no agreement to this bill, on 1/1/26, we would be euthanizing for no good reason about 1.5 million caged hens and 270,000 pullets. So where does the $141 million come from while also being fiscally responsible by 1/1/26? Without a phase-in, two things happen. There's no longer a price premium for cage-free to help fund more conversions, and we will have no cage production to generate revenue, making it very difficult, if not impossible, to find lenders. Currently, over $300,000 is earmarked for control. What is the plan? This bill gives an exemption to certain eggs laid. If the General Assembly is true to their position on cage-free eggs, that this bill is to protect the health and welfare of every consumer in the state of Maryland, promoting food safety and animal welfare, then this bill needs to be all-inclusive of every egg. We must be very careful about the direction in which we may be heading. This bill will indeed make eggs more expensive to produce, requiring more capital than our conventional product, more expensive to buy, has a dirtier environment for workers and birds, is environmentally unsound, needing twice the footprint, more feed for birds to produce, more water for birds to consume, has more yield loss, a greater risk for disease in birds, and an additional food safety concern with floor eggs. Lastly, ESA believes the purchase of cage-free eggs should be a consumer choice backed by retail demand and not a product of special interest opinions and/or preferences. With all this said, I respectfully ask that you vote unfavorable for this bill.
And sir, could you just identify yourself?
Oh, sorry. Bill Dix with ESA America.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Vice Chair, fellow committee members. My name is Dr. Christy Scott, and I've been the staff veterinarian for ESA America for the past 22 years. I oversee the health and welfare of 6 million chickens. I also oversee the food safety programs for 6 processing plants in 3 states. For hens, the trends towards cage-free housing certainly has some benefits. If you've ever been in a cage-free poultry operation, you can observe birds exhibiting many of the same natural activities you'd expect to see wild birds demonstrate. The birds appear happy. Nevertheless, there are risks that come with the more open environment. The same risks that many years ago prompted producers to move hens from the floor into cages. Moving hens out of cages could have a negative impact on animal health and food safety. One of the major risks for cage-free hens is bacterial diseases. Hens that are on the floor come in contact with manure and increase the risk for exposure to pathogens like E. coli and Salmonella. Parasitic disease is another risk for cage-free hens, with coccidiosis and roundworms topping the list. Cage-free hens are far more likely to ingest these parasites compared to cage hens, resulting in intestinal damage that can lead to poor nutrient absorption, poor shell quality, and even mortality. Eggs laid by hens on the floor instead of in nesting boxes are at risk for bacterial contamination, which could adversely affect food safety. USDA research concluded that floor eggs have the greatest opportunity for exposure to high level of microorganisms and human pathogens. Pest control in these houses is difficult to achieve. Effective pest control is one of the major ways to decrease the risk of salmonella infection and spread. There are welfare concerns as well, where feather pecking and cannibalism are common. In a cage-free operation where birds in the house can interact with each other, a more exaggerated pecking order may develop because there are more opportunities for boss birds to dominate weaker, more timid birds. Piling can be common in cage-free houses and can be caused by weather, noise, drafts, ventilation, lights, or any random stimulus. When birds pile up, the ones that get trapped on the bottom of the pile suffer the consequences and suffocate and die. Cage-free hens are more likely to sustain broken bones from flying and landing mishaps. I am seeing diseases and issues that I thought I would only read about in books. This is
Okay,
why I think you should vote no.
Great. Thank you for your testimony. Any
Thank you.
questions for this panel? Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you. Almost missed the bell there. So either one of you can answer me this. In your operation, I know you have a major operation. Are you seeing that that you are not getting business because of this 40% demand of cage-free, or, you know, I'd just like to understand the impact of one versus the other, the demand. I'm sure if the demand was there, that you would go towards that phase of an operation. But is the business model there now that is driving you in that direction? Or I just need to understand, you know, we're hearing a lot of information, and I'm trying to understand where the demand is and where the investment is, and where, you know, what exactly is the path here?
Yes, that's right. We want to be positioned that if opportunity comes our way for that product, that we're able to provide it. But currently, right now, we have a few retailers that have talked about being interested, but there's not been any commitment.
So the majority
of our eggs are being sold on the conventional market.
Right. Thank you.
Further questions for this panel? Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Scott, is it? Yes, thank you. I'm really confused. You talked a lot about disease and problems for the egg-laying hens in the open areas. So is that the same for the meat chickens? Because we saw those in open areas this fall.
Okay, so meat birds stay in those areas for 9 weeks at the most. And so those birds cycle through those very quickly, whereas our birds are in these houses for extended periods of time. And so when they're in these areas for extended periods of times, they're exposed to these risks a lot longer. And also you're looking at a different scenario of what our product is. Their product is the meat. Our product is the egg that they're producing. So when your product is the egg and you are exposed to roundworms, for example, and you have a roundworm that goes to a different location where it's not supposed to go, and now you have roundworms getting inside the egg before the shell is even being put on, and customers are getting eggs with roundworms, live roundworms in the egg, you don't see those problems in birds that are in cages where they're not exposed to their own manure.
There's a reason I don't eat meat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of going back to what Delegate Jacobs was asking. I think you guys have made it very, very clear that the January 2026 implementation date is basically impossible by your estimations. Would there be any date by which, I guess my question is, how long would it take you to implement this? Should we pass some form of this that has a delayed implementation, or we push the implementation date back to say 2030? You know, would a 7-year time frame, 10-year time, how long would this kind of implementation take?
Given the detail of my testimony as far as the length of time, you take that into account with all of our structures. It is a 6-year minimum with no interruptions.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Great. Any further questions for this panel? Okay, thank you all. We have an additional panel of unfavorable: Grayson Middleton, Delmarva Chicken Association, Bradley Rill, Lippy Brother Farms, Chris Pierce, Heritage Poultry Management Services, and Lindsay Thompson, Maryland Grain Producers Association. Please, someone go ahead when you're ready.
Don't touch somebody. Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Grayson Middleton, and I'm the Government Affairs Manager for Delmarva Chicken Association. We represent the growers, companies, and allied businesses on Maryland's Eastern Shore. I should start by saying that first, that we don't represent the layer industry. We represent meat chickens only. And except for the purposes of transportation, our chickens are never in cages, but that is what works best for our model of production. However, as an agricultural association, we take exception to any policy or law which bans a widespread, generally accepted agricultural practice without basis in scientifically proven research and which disregards the economic well-being of farmers. I have heard from at least one producer that if this legislation is passed, it will force them to close their family business because they simply cannot afford to alter their production methods so drastically. By some estimates, this legislation would cause production costs to increase by 40% and would require a 119% increase in labor. This is also bad for the consumer. Analysis have shown that these mandates lead to a 35% reduction in egg supply and up to a 22% increase in the price of eggs. Finally, I'd like to say that high-path avian influenza is still the #1 threat to the broiler and egg industries. Studies from the EU, which was mentioned earlier, where cage-free is now mandated, have demonstrated significantly higher rates of communicable diseases among poultry, and this is a threat to our farmers and their livelihood. Again, we oppose this legislation because it is attempting to fix a problem that isn't there, and we think it is very concerning when legislation is considered that gives more credence to objective beliefs about what is best for animals than it does sound science and economic viability. And with that, we urge an unfavorable report on HB 357, and thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Thompson, and I am here today on behalf of the Maryland Grain Producers Association in opposition to this legislation. I'm going to speak very specifically to a very narrow concern that we have, and that is, as you heard from ISE, their facility alone consumes 2.6 million bushels of corn directly from Maryland farmers. Maryland farmers in that area are able to deliver their grain directly to the facility and receive a premium for such. The entire layer industry in Maryland consumes just over 3 million bushels of corn, again, directly from Maryland farmers, which represents 4% of the total corn production in Maryland. We are concerned that if forced to transition on such a tight time frame, that these businesses will go out of business, including family farms, before we are ever able to realize the benefit that Delegate Ziegler mentioned of the fact that cage-free birds do actually eat more corn. So while we like that aspect of the bill in increasing demand for corn, our concern is that this is not done on a timeline and for reasons that would keep those farms in business. And with that, we would urge your unfavorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Brad Rill with Lippy Brothers Farms, a fourth generation family farm in Carroll and Baltimore counties. We own Sunnyside Poultry Farm, an egg laying operation that opened in 1992 in Westminster, Maryland, where we produce around 30,000 dozen eggs a day and employ 19 people. We have 4 100,000 hen capacity chicken houses. We utilize all the chicken manure as an alternative to commercial fertilizer on our 8,000 acres of cropland. We oppose this bill. It would force us to close Sunnyside Poultry Farms. Our houses are not designed to be cage-free. The estimated cost to remodel our existing houses would be $20 million. This financial commitment is not feasible without help and long-term guaranteed price contracts from retailers. If our financial goals are met, the timing and planning for a remodel like this would take years and need to be completed in phases. We just can't shut down our operation of all 4 houses and remodel. We would lose all source of income and all of our employees. In the conventional house, we are able to closely monitor the environment, the health, and the welfare of each chicken, maintaining the ability to weigh the same birds consistently to allow for adjustments in feed formulations and health monitoring. Cage-free systems have a higher cost of production and would need additional labor and are also less productive. Cage-free systems have higher mortality rates, more parasites, and disease transmission. There are more ammonia and dust emissions that come from cage-free systems that are harmful to the birds and also to the employees and the environment. Let the consumer have choices. Cage-free are nearly double the price of conventional eggs. These increase in prices restricts the, these increased prices restricts the lower income families from being able to purchase affordable eggs and feed their family. I urge you to oppose this bill.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the committee. My name is Chris Pierce. I'm the president of Heritage Poultry Management Services. Since January of 2002, more than 20 years ago, our business has been providing flock management expertise and services and working with Sunnyside Farms and their egg farm in Westminster. I'm here this afternoon to make comments pertaining to the proposed legislation that would prohibit Sunnyside from continuing to operate their commercial egg farm. I'm asking you to oppose the bill as it will have significant negative impact in many areas. Let me just highlight just a few. Looking at the real life examples of other states that have implemented similar cage-free legislation, which was talked about earlier, Washington, California, Oregon, there's been significant price increases to consumers when only cage-free eggs are the option. In these states, the cage-free eggs are double the price of what conventional eggs are priced in states that they are not prohibited. With the inflation that many financial hardships that many Maryland families are feeling, eggs might be priced out of reach. For consumers who are already preferring to purchase cage-free eggs, most, if not all retailers in Maryland already have many options of this production type. I believe that consumers should have the right to choose the types of eggs that they wish to purchase, not the government mandating the only options. If this proposed legislation would be passed and implemented into law, most, if not all the eggs Maryland consumers would purchase would not be coming from Maryland egg farms, they'd be coming from other states, thus weakening the agricultural community and pushing egg farming out of Maryland. I also wanted to make comment on the aggressive time frame currently listed in the bill, the language of January 1st of 26. This time frame is totally unachievable without significant pain and financial loss to the farm. The lifespan of the hens at Sunnyside Farms is 2 years, with flock replacement plans and commitments to support their continuous operation of the farm already in place for many years in advance. I urge the committee to oppose House Bill 0357 due to the significant negative impact it will have. I'm open to any questions of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Boyce.
sorry, trying to tell the chair what to do. He's not having it. Thank you so much. I do want to address the cost. The sponsor and the proponents believe that this will drive down the cost of eggs, and that nationwide, this is kind of a movement just moving forward. And I guess the question for you, given that this is your business, at what point do you see, quote unquote, I guess less of a confinement type of industry changing or transitioning? 4 years, 2 years, 10 years? I mean,
Thank you, Delegate. I appreciate it. I'll answer that. I'm a big believer in letting the consumers drive that choice, as was shared by those in support of this bill, that 40% of the hens in the United States are cage free. 40% of the demand is not cage free, and our friends from ESA share that. They didn't go deep into it, but they have a lot of eggs that are produced as cage free. They don't have a home for them as cage free, so the consumer buying them as conventional is really getting cage free because they have less demand and they have more supply. So I see Sunnyside and others in this situation that they will drive the transition when the demand is there. The significant investment this is a small family farm. You know, we talk about fourth generation. This is Lippy's real small family farm. Don't have $20 million in the back pocket, 6% interest, like money's unattainable. And that's for all walks of life, including the farm, but it will transition as more consumers want it. I heard some numbers earlier. I'm not sure that 87% of the consumers are buying cage free. Like, I think a lot of people say one thing, but their actions are another thing. Don't you think you should be able to, when you fly, you extend your legs and have a cocktail in your hand? But they buy coach seats. They don't buy first class seats. Like, there's some of that logic that follows. You can say one thing, but in the quietness of the dairy case, you might make another decision when you're trying to balance your family's checkbook.
well, thank you for that. But I am looking for like a timeline. In your opinion, given
Sure.
that this is your business, the bill talks about, I think it's 2026. I know folks have been talking about 2030, 2031. I guess from your perspective, what would, I understand you're saying
Sure.
they should be driven by consumer market, but given that market and given that it is 40% across the country, what would your estimation be before it becomes like a full on?
I honestly think it is a minimum of 6 years. I do believe it is. And that could either be the exit strategy for Sunnyside to figure out how you're not euthanizing young pullets that are on that farm.
Right.
Like, or they have a transition that we do get a firm commitment because there's a retailer saying, I raise my hand, I'm willing to pay the actual expenses that would finance that loan they would need to take. 6 years is what I would say the minimum is, Delegate.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Otto. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my experience of raising animals and things and keeping my pets, if these cages were so stressful, it would greatly impact their egg production. Is that not correct?
That is correct, Delegate. If I can say that, as we shared earlier, United Egg Producers created their animal welfare program a number of years ago, which tied into flock density, but it also tied into the oversight of potable water and monitoring for disease. And there's a lot of different aspects. And Dr. Scott shared some of those things. The responsibility that the Lippy Rill family has is to provide for the best care, proper ventilation, proper lighting, continuous feed and water, and people walk in the barns to make sure they are cared for. Reality, dead chickens don't lay eggs. I mean, that's a reality of it. So they want to do all they can to keep the birds minimal stress, which ties into better health, better livability. There's no antibiotics. There has not been any salmonella on this farm. Like, there's a lot of things we're talking about are, like, in my opinion, like, are kind of fearful things because we don't want salmonella either. This farm participates in the MECAP program, which is a higher standard than the FDA egg rule, that we're doing additional environmental testing. We're looking for salmonella, not because versus like avoiding it. Don't ask the question because then you don't have it. If you don't ask, you don't test, you don't have it. We actually look at we actually do additional testing to ensure the consumers that are purchasing and consuming these eggs have confidence that they are producing safe, good eggs for their family.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if some of these issues were addressed earlier, I apologize. I was at another bill hearing. So I'm curious on the issue of science, because one gentleman challenged, the bill saying it's not based on science. I'm not hearing that much about the science that you're presenting, except one mention of the EU and issues there. What about Maryland-based facts around the health of these birds in any cage-free settings in Maryland, about these disease rates you're quoting? You're making very general statements and with no citations, frankly.
Personally, we're the only producers up here. I can only speak on behalf of, for Maryland production of what's happening at Sunnyside Farms. I don't have any data or any interaction with any other conventional farmers or cage-free or free-range farmers. I can say we do provide management services of cage-free farms in Pennsylvania. And because that isn't, I don't want to discriminate. I want to give consumers options. I'm a big believer that the consumers need to have the right to choose what they want to purchase. And we believe that we need to provide the same care for birds that are in cages that are not in cages. We need to meet their nutritional needs, vaccination, disease protocol, farmer giving the attention in eyes and ears and listening. Is they're chirping at night because the birds are going through a bronchitis challenge, which means maybe need to run more vitamins and electrolytes, like natural ingredients, no artificial stuff. Because just like, and I always like to make this illustration, but we want to care for them to meet what their needs are. But I don't have data.
So you have data or anecdotal stories from Pennsylvania, you're
Yes.
saying, but not from Maryland.
Because we don't work with any cage-free farms in Maryland.
Well, to make good decisions here, we need information about Maryland. That's what I'm looking for. Does anybody have information about Maryland operations? And where you can cite specific disease rates and death rates and those kinds of things? Or did I miss that earlier?
Delegate, if I may.
Well, because the previous scientific panel also all I heard was the European Union.
I think that I would refer you to the letter by the Veterinary Association speaking to that. And then also I've cited in my letter that I submitted yesterday, the study by the NIH that uses data from European Union. The climate, geography, otherwise in Maryland wouldn't make it, as far as I know, substantially different than what happened in those countries.
But we are lawmakers in Maryland. We cannot base our decisions on Pennsylvania and the European Union respectfully. And so that's concerning to me that I'm hearing, sir, I believe you're the one that said that this is not science-based, this bill, and it's about intuiting how animals feel. And I kind of find that a little bit offensive. But then let's talk about science in Maryland, in the state of Maryland that we are trying to represent and make good laws for. And Mr. Chairman, there's somebody in the back with their hand up. I don't know if no, okay, that's fine. Okay, so that was my question. And I would really appreciate follow-up information, not general statements about that the sky is going to fall and all the eggs, all the hens in Maryland that are laying eggs, if they're not in cages are going to die. Thank you.
Delegate Guyton.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, I definitely hear the concerns that I'm hearing from the business owners and the producers. I think this question is for you, Kristen, actually, because I don't believe from what we've seen over the last couple of years that this bill is probably going away. Whether it passes this year or not, I don't know, but I think it's something that everyone in this industry is probably planning. How can we get there for when or if something like this passes, or just to do the nice thing for chickens, however you want to go about it. We've heard from the farms about how long they think they could make that transition. And first of all, Kristen, thank you for getting that grain rescue kit for fire department in my district last year. That was amazing work. So I know the great work you do. Do your producers, do you have a timeline or some idea of how the grain producers could also make that transition? If you say it will hurt them now if they have to make the transition to a cage-free birds, but how could they also plan to make that transition, and how long do you think that would take? I mean, it kind of looks like we're trying to think forward on this issue.
Sure. So the production practices that are used to produce corn for caged versus cage-free birds are exactly the same. So there's no transition that would need to happen from a grain production standpoint. Our concern is primarily around the local demand, right? So ISE, as an example, had a grain elevator in Warwick, Maryland, in Delegate Jacobs' district, that farmers can local farmers in Kent and Cecil County can drive their grain directly a very short distance there and have a local market for their grain for which they receive a premium. If, as we heard from ISE, they're forced to transition on a very short timeline, then that market would go away, right? They can't do this transition in 2 years. And so those farmers would lose that market. So the answer to your question is that the grain producers would be ready to transition on whatever the timeline it is that the growers, the poultry growers, the egg layer farmers. So, you know, maybe Mr. Rill would have an idea as a much smaller producer, what may ultimately be realistic for him.
Okay, thank you for that.
So, Mr. Rill, do you have a response?
When you have somebody buy your eggs.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Chris might have a better answer, but there definitely needs to be a longer time frame. If as a family farm, we decide that we can secure the funds and that we think there's a possibility that we can make a profit, you know, a lot of decision making has to go into that. But if logistically, if we make that decision to do so, then we have 4 houses, and I think it would have to be done, you know, in phases, 1 house at a time, so that we wouldn't lose all of our source of income and our employees. We would have to do, one house, and I can't answer how long it would take or any of that stuff, but I'm sure, you're going to have to get a plan together. You're going to have to get the contractors to be able to do the work. You're going to have to supply the cage-free systems, the actual material, and I'm guessing it would probably take at least a year per house to make that transition, and then you need a little time ahead here to plan. So I agree. I mean, I think if we decided to make that transition, we would need a minimum of 6 years to be fully cage free.
Okay,
if that helped.
Thank you to this panel. We have 2 more in-person witnesses in opposition: Tyler Huff, Maryland Farm Bureau, and Kelly Lockyer, Maryland Retailers Association.
Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the ENT Committee. For the record, my name is Tyler Huff, and I am the Director of Government Relations for Maryland Farm Bureau. It has been a long hearing already, and many of the points that I have been echoed by the producers that are involved in this already. So I will keep this short and sweet and talk to one point, a question from Delegate Ziegler that you brought up. We were tipped off last year about American Families for Farms. That is not an agricultural organization. That is an organization that intends to end animal agriculture in the country. Many of those names on that list were Farm Bureau members that were unaware their names were being used in support of this bill last year. It is an issue that is happening across the country, as many other state farm bureaus have seen this issue. And we have a letter that explains all this that I would be happy to pass along to you and the rest of the committee. So again, on the members of Maryland Farm Bureau, the nearly 9,500 member families, we urge a unfavorable report. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? All right, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 357. We'll now turn to HB 379. Our colleague Delegate Love, Wildlife Traveling Animal Acts Prohibition. And if you have a panel, feel free to bring them on up.
Right when you're done. Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. While my panel gets here, I will get started in the interest of time. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Delegate Sarah Love, here to present to you HB 379, which would end the practice of using big cats, primates, and elephants in traveling acts in Maryland. I'm just going to give you one quick story that exemplifies what I'm talking about. When my kids were little, I took them to the circus, and I remember sitting in horror as 6 large Bengal tigers rolled over in unison and lumbered around doing tricks, looking to me as if they were drugged out of their minds. And my children looked at me and they said, "Mommy, what's wrong with those tigers?" And I've never been back to the zoo since. So the good news is that so many of the circuses now are moving away from this. Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey, the biggest circus you've ever heard of, no longer uses live animals in their circuses. So I want to sponsor responsibly. That's all I have to say. I'm going to show a couple of quick pictures that will hopefully help you smile, and I will move it on to my panelists. I'm going to go next. I'll count to 3 and we'll move on.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Tell me when.
Thank
Go.
you. Those
Go.
are beautiful pictures.
Go.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today and speak for this incredibly important piece of legislation, HB 379. Not unlike your situation, I feel particularly excited to be here as the CEO and president of the Humane Society of the United States, which I have been at this organization for 32 years and dedicated to animal protection for many years before that. This is a full circle moment for me. The first time I remember feeling really impacted by something I saw for animals was at a 2nd grade field trip, going to Ringling Brothers. So excited, couldn't wait to get there. Got there and saw tigers jumping through fire hoops, elephants doing ridiculous tricks. It saddened me. I'm so happy to be here today to see the progress that has been made in Maryland with the Commonwealth of Montgomery County and Gaithersburg already moving in this direction. It is so important that we address the cruelties of these animals. They are not meant to be in traveling shows, confined, carted around from state to state in the worst conditions, living in their own excrement and sadness. It's also a public safety issue. There's case after documented case where these animals have come in contact with people. Elephant rides, they're not merry-go-rounds, they're wild animals. And the only way they don't always act up is because they have been literally beaten into submission. Even then they act. They turn on their handlers. And oftentimes when that happens, you've got children on the backs of these animals. It's unnecessary, it's cruel, it's a public health, it's a public issue of safety, and it's changing. As you pointed out, Ringling has moved away from it. 150 years of exploiting animals, they know this is not the model, this is not the way forward. I urge you strongly to support HB 379. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Catherine Dangle, and I'm here to testify on House Bill 379. This bill prevents the use of wildcats, non-human primates, bears, and elephants in moving circuses. And I believe that this bill is necessary because of 2 main reasons. The first is that I'm concerned about the animal's physical health. There have been many examples of animals in these situations being mistreated and neglected. Some of these animals live in terrible conditions for years. Some are even taken from their natural homes in the wild and put into these circuses. They can be neglected from food and water, shelter, or necessary medical procedures. In 2019, an elephant named Belua died after a urinary infection led to blood poisoning. Had she gotten medical attention any medical attention at all, this probably wouldn't have happened. Another concern is for animals' mental health. Many of the tricks that circus animals are forced to do are unnatural tricks. Animals would not normally do many of the things that we see them doing in circuses.
More times than not, these tricks are taught to animals through harsh punishments. Examples of these cruel punishments are beating or constraining the animals, or underfeeding them so that when they comply, the food they receive when they do something correct is much more rewarding. One of the main tools used to beat animals, and especially elephants, is a bullhook. Bullhooks appear similar to a fireplace poker, but they are much sharper. These tools, they are classified as weapons. In conclusion, many moving circuses with animals abuse, neglect, and mistreat them. Circuses are supposed to be places where where people go and have a good time and enjoy themselves. These are not supposed to be institutions of abuse. To continue to prevent further physical and psychological harm to animals, please vote yes on House Bill 379.
Good afternoon, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman. As my colleagues have stated, wild animal performances are a relic of the past. We've seen big tops like Barnum Bailey, Ringling end this cruel practice on their own accord. They've eliminated wild animal performances, instituted new standards because they were named and shamed, and they changed their standards because of public opinion, not the law. So it's the public, your constituents, that has reformed this industry. We need this law to be on the books because right now, those that are still engaging in this practice are doing so under what's called the Animal Welfare Act. And under the Animal Welfare Act, there's only about 100 inspectors for millions of animals. And what's more is the Animal Welfare Act isn't even really designed to be regulating this industry. It's designed to be regulating animal testing. And what's more is the enforcement mechanism is through the USDA. The USDA has come before Congress to say, we don't want to enforce it. They have flat out told Congress they don't want to enforce it. So can we be surprised that they're not doing a good job? Your constituents have said that this is unacceptable, this is inhumane, and it's a danger to our health and safety. We've already seen Montgomery County and Gaithersburg pass this legislation. We've seen it in 8 states, over 45 countries, England, Mexico, Greece, Italy, Singapore, just to name a few. And again, there was this void created when the more established industry members vacated and changed their policies. So it created a vacuum where the worst bad actors rushed to the bottom of the barrel to fill that space. So typically they are out-of-state companies coming in to use Maryland as a safe haven to abuse animals, take those profits, meager profits, and leave. So I'd urge you to give this bill a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you also identify yourself?
Oh, my name is Kim Fullerton. I am here on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association. I'm also an animal law professor at the University of Maryland, and I'm the wildlife chair for the American Bar Association. But today I'm just here for the MSBA.
Great, thank you. And Catherine, great job. Whoever the Humane Society's hired gun is, better watch their back. She's coming for her job. Are there any questions for the sponsor of our panel, Delegate Foley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just thank you, and thank you, Delegate Love, for bringing this bill. I think it's incredibly important, but I have a couple questions just so that I know what we're talking about. So would this affect like petting zoos? I can't imagine a cougar being in a petting zoo, but would this affect petting zoos?
No, the language of the bill, let me put it up. It's just for traveling acts. So if you look at,
well, there are traveling petting zoos, right?
So if you look at, not allow for the performance of a covered animal in a travel, animal act, and it only covers the 8 animals. So if you're transporting a tiger for a performance, then it will, but petting zoos don't have tigers.
Right, it does list petting zoos, but you mean just in the performance?
Well, I doubt any of the petting zoos are gonna have any of
Well, they won't have
animals.
cougars, but they might have monkeys.
Monkeys aren't on.
Primates.
Well, non-human primates.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Petting zoos have monkeys.
They might. I mean, I don't know. I mean, or they might. I don't know what they have. Actually, I'm just asking if somebody comes with a petting zoo, they're not performing. It's just a little petting zoo thing. if they had some of these animals, would that be covered by this or?
If I
They
could weigh in.
cannot have those animals, no.
Yeah, okay. And then my second question is, sometimes, I mean, I don't know if we have this in Maryland or not, but I know sometimes there are amusement parks or water parks, I've seen this, where they use animals. They'll use, for example, baby tigers. This is one of the water parks does this, and they take pictures with the baby tiger. Would that be covered by this? So the tiger, like the animal
yes.
poses with them. So your opinion is that would be covered by this?
Are they transported to the facility for that performance?
I don't
I'm
know if
looking at the,
I don't know if they're traveling shows. That's the part I don't know, but I'm
Well, I
trying
think
to get
that-
at what a performance is, I guess.
right, so performance is actually defined in the bill.
Okay.
And if it's a non-mobile permanent institution and the animal is not transported for the sole purpose of a performance, it's not going to apply.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
But for the record, I don't think they should be doing that anyway.
Delegate Ziegler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing this bill. I just wanted to ask about the Department of Natural Resources comment that they are not equipped to deal with lions, tigers, and bears. So,
oh my,
right.
So we spoke with the Department of Natural Resources this morning, and we're having discussions about where this should reside, because their concern is what happens if, you know, a lion escapes. We're not equipped to deal with it. And those of us from, you know, well, actually all of us will remember the tiger that, or not tiger, the zebra that escaped up in Prince George's County. So those discussions are happening. We're trying to figure out who is best to oversee this. And that discussion hasn't concluded yet. So thank you.
Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for bringing this bill, Delegate. If you clarifying, because I noticed in the text of the bill, it does specify that rides are included. Would that pertain to movement even like within the state of Maryland? Like if, you know, an elephant is transported from somewhere in Maryland to somewhere else in Maryland for the purpose of elephant rides or something like that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just more a clarification question than anything else. So obviously the list of animals is pretty clear, but there is a section where we're talking about performances and rides and things like that. I would just want to make sure that somehow some inspector wouldn't apply this to a rodeo or bull riding or something like that, you know, kind of because that is a performance. There's riding going on there, those sorts of things.
Sure. Those, are you talking about rodeos on horses?
Yes.
Okay, they're not a covered animal here, so it would not apply to them.
Okay.
Further questions for the sponsor of our panel? Okay, thank you, Delegate Love. We have a few more favorable witnesses. Lisa Radoff, Maryland Votes for Animals, and Jennifer Bevan-Dangle, Humane Society of the United States.
Hello again, I'm still Lisa Radoff. Thank you so much for letting me testify on this bill. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. First of all, I just wanted to mention this is not a new issue, actually. Delegate Aruna Miller in 2018 and Maryland Votes for Animals and HSUS and some of us here did work on a bill like this about elephants. It didn't get very far. So just as you've seen Barnum and Bailey making this transition, also Universe Soul, if any of you are familiar with Universe Soul, does come to Baltimore County. They also have eliminated the use of wild animals in their traveling acts. You've heard a lot of very compelling points from my colleagues and our esteemed sponsor. Thank you very much. I just wanted to add that I was curious about the quality of the circus. Actually, this was a story on the front page of the Sun, Baltimore Sun, back in the fall when Barnum and Bailey did come, not using animals. And one of my board members was driving back from the circus with her 12-year-old son. He got on the phone and said, "Miss Lisa, the robotic dog was out of sight. Unbelievable. It was wonderful." My board member said it didn't smell. It was a pleasure. So I just wanted to leave with that little bit of odorama for all of you and thank our sponsors so much for this bill and urge a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Bevan Dangle. I'm the State Director for the Humane Society of the United States here in Maryland. We've already heard from us, so I simply want to respond to just some of the questions because these are really important questions. The bill would apply anytime that these specific animals, tigers, bears, elephants, are being taken off-site for the purposes of basically any type of performance. The list of animals is constrained because we understand I have horses. We take them off site quite a bit. We certainly don't want to run afoul of a law that I helped pass myself. So we understand that these are sort of the most dangerous animals. They're the hardest to keep, but we do stand firm that there's no purpose for which these animals should be being taken off site. There's about 100 communicable diseases between monkeys and people. So if you have monkeys at your local petting zoo, you really might want to flag that as a concern. So with that, I'll just say me too.
Thank you. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious. Why are clouded leopards excluded?
So the federal Big Cat Public Safety Act, that was sort of the federal effort to start this conversation around human-animal interaction, that exempted that particular species. And we're just trying to be consistent.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 379. We will turn to HB 420 from our colleague Delegate Lehman. State and local parks, play area accessibility communication boards, and if you have a panel, please bring them up.
Thank you. You want us now?
Yeah, just, yeah. Yeah, it's fine. We can put it up there.
Pictures and from a link to the video you probably
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and my esteemed ENT colleagues. For the record, I'm Delegate Mary Lehman, asking for your favorable consideration of House Bill 420. House Bill 420 requires local governments to install communication boards in all newly constructed play areas located within a public park or recreation area. The bill gives localities the option of installing communication boards in already existing play areas undergoing alterations as well. What are communication boards? You can see an example here up on the screen. So they are permanent structures that display photos, symbols, or illustrations to supplement or replace spoken language as a way of expression and communication. They are designed specifically to support nonverbal people or people with limited language ability. And it allows them, as you see in this picture, to point to images to express themselves. For example, a signboard can display a picture of a sad or a smiley face to help individuals communicate how they were feeling. It can display a picture of a toilet or water so that a person, in this case, a child at a play area, can communicate basic needs. So researchautism.org characterizes the role of communication boards as followed. By offering images as an alternative for spoken language, communication boards are more inclusive of those who might not be able to verbalize their thoughts and can help others who are with them to understand the needs and the thoughts of a non-speaking or a minimally speaking individual. Specifically, these boards in a playground setting can help nonverbal children or persons with other disabilities to communicate with caregivers, parents, peers. and affected or who are affected with disabilities, including those on the autism spectrum, people with speech apraxia, deafness, blindness, and people with learning or intellectual disabilities. I do have some friendly amendments that in working with and talking to MACO about its concerns, and you should have those amendments were submitted with the testimony. So there are two. And what they do is state that the Department of Natural Resources will create a grant program, and this is, within its existing budget, to allocate $100,000 of statewide program open space funds every fiscal year for a grant that will specifically cover the costs of these communication boards, and that would include the cost of installation as well. The amendment changes the funding source from local program open space money, to state program open space funding. Mr. Chairman, you probably know this from your time on appropriations. I did not realize there were two different streams of funding for program open space. One is state, one is local. And then the second amendment changes the definition of communication boards by adding Braille so that the boards are more inclusive and they mirror the very successful communication boards that are being installed in Howard County Park. So Howard County has been leading the way on this issue. Kudos to them. The funds can provide up to the DNR funds can provide up to $5,000 per communication board. So localities have more flexibility with what photos and symbols that they want to include on their boards. They can meet with local advisory groups to ensure their boards best meet their community's needs. In summary, regardless of age or disability status, people should be able to communicate their basic needs to others. By mandating communication boards at public play areas across Maryland, we would be taking an important step toward fulfilling a need for nonverbal people and others whose disabilities limit their verbal communication, and will help us build a better, more inclusive Maryland. Thank you, and I ask a favorable report.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee. I'm glad to be here today. My name is Melissa Rosenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Autism Society of Maryland, formerly the Howard County Autism Society, and we're here in support of HB 420, which would bring more communication boards to our state and local parks, increasing play area accessibility for all children. When we talk about inclusion in our state, we want inclusion to start at the earliest stages of development, and that's on the playground, so that Maryland's children grow up with that expectation that, of course, we are inclusive on the playgrounds, in the classroom, and extending into the workplace and our community, a mindset for a lifetime. In October of 2020, we donated the first of 8 communication boards to public elementary schools in Howard County. That was followed by an additional 2 for some of our wonderful parks in Howard County, Bland-Air Park, Laura's Play for All Playground, and North Centennial. Today, they're on every elementary school playground in Howard County. That was funded by the school system, but just terrific to see that. We've also donated interior boards for the library system, and they're being used there. And we get calls all the time from other states, other counties, even outside the country, wanting to know about our boards. They've seen them on social media or our website, and we're happy to share that. This is what inclusion is all about. And the one thing I will add, not only are the kids able to access a different way of communication, but they don't need to bring their AACs with them. If you've seen some of our kiddos, and a third of persons with autism will be non-speaking at some point in their lives, sometimes for a lifetime, but they use devices, and these boards allow them to kind of just ditch those and just play like normal kids. I wanted to share one story that it was just a wonderful outcome that I was at the Bland-Air Park, and a young child actually took my hand and pointed to the picture showing me how to use the device. And I've included a link to a video that we created with our friends from Arcad, Maryland, and some photos in the testimony. So thank you, and I encourage your support of this legislation.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. My name is Andy Culp, and I'm the Executive Director of the ARC Maryland, and here in support with amendments, the sponsors' amendments for this bill, House Bill 420. I could echo everything that my colleagues said, that, you know, communication boards promote accessibility. They're not just for kids with disabilities. They're for people who don't have English as a first language. They promote, you know, reciprocal communication between people on a playground. Children use them in their games that kind of naturally occur on a playground to communicate with each other without words. And it normalizes, you know, the experience of playing with a child who may not use words to communicate. It just kind of, you know, disability is natural, and that's what we're trying to promote. You know, through all of the services that we provide in all of our trainings. You know, there was a report that was recently done. I'm not sure if this committee got a briefing on it, but it was completed by the Maryland DD Council in partnership with the Maryland Department of Disabilities, called Playgrounds for All. And it's a guide on how we can create, you know, it's a framework and toolkit for more inclusive playgrounds in Maryland. It's an excellent guide, and communication boards are a key piece of inclusive playgrounds, along with, you know, 0-step structures. So children, you know, with physical disabilities can access the equipment just like their peers. So in closing, I would just say that we need more opportunities for communication and creating play spaces that foster connections through play for all children. So we urge a favorable report on House Bill 420 as amended. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Lehman is the virtual witness on your panel.
I'm sorry.
Is the virtual witness part of your panel?
No,
No?
I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Okay.
There may be.
Okay. Any questions for the sponsor or the panel? Vice Chair Boyce.
Thank you, Delegate Lehman, for this bill. Incredibly exciting, and thank you for that story. I wanted to know if you saw the Department of Natural Resources letter about suggestions as it relates to the use of open space money.
I did. I just was made aware of that. Well, there was an earlier version that I think expressed concern that we did not allow, the way the amendment is written, that we weren't allowing the agency, as I understand it, flexibility in finding another source of funding other than program open space funding. And I am certainly open to that suggestion as an amendment.
And I don't know if they're going to testify or not, but I was wondering how this also fits in with, and I should probably know better, but I don't know it off the top of my head, but how it potentially, this legislation fits into the Maryland Great Outdoors Act potentially as well. So I would love for you to check in with them on that, but them to check in with you as
Yes,
well.
Madam Vice Chair, I do appreciate that point.
But that's where the
It-
extra money may come.
And it does apply to both DNR play areas and to local government. That's in the very beginning of the bill. So that is a good point. But as far as that specific new law, will have to follow up on that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Delegate Guyton.
Thank you so much. I'll make it quick. I'm on the bill. You know, I love the bill. But I do have a question about funding. And I think I love the Vice Chair's comment just now about talking about agreeing in the bill that you can utilize other types of funding. I would also suggest, would you be interested in also adding a provision in this bill that says, if somebody wanted to donate these, they could also be included in the playground, because that is something that might be helpful to the locals to actually have that spelled out in the bill.
Absolutely. Thank you, Delegate Guyton, for that question. There is a question around standards, and that's why we have the flexibility with, you know, encouraging local participation. We specifically did not get into standards around the size of the sign, except to say it has to be a permanent structure, because there are much lower end signs that are, for example, almost like large, not a tapestry, I forget what the word is, like a banner that hangs on a fence. We're not looking for something like that because that wouldn't withstand the elements. But there is, I think Howard County is a great example. The picture you saw was a sign or something very similar to what Howard County has. I believe it's about 70 to 80 separate symbols. And in Howard, what we liked after getting input from the Federation for the Blind was that under each symbol, there is the Braille right underneath it to match each individual symbol. So there is flexibility that way. But yeah, we're open to ideas on funding. I just don't, for all of you, there were some back and forth suggestions about the shall versus may language. And as you know, that can get tricky. We definitely want to be clear in saying that DNR shall fund these, but that we're open to saying they may use program open space or other funding if they can identify it. But the suggestion, as I think you will hear from Mako, came about creating a new small grant program, and you'll see it in the fiscal note, that's within their existing resources. We do not intend to add, this requirement on top of what DNR already does, that they would carve out $100,000 a year for these grants to localities that are building new playgrounds, and in some cases, the renovation of an existing playground. That would be a replacement of all the equipment, not just maybe a single piece of equipment or, some sprucing up of an existing play area.
Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate. Does this apply only to playgrounds that are maintained by county level parks, recs and parks, or is this applied to municipalities as well?
It does not, you know what, that's a good question. We talk about localities. I believe it covers municipal governments as well. It doesn't include school playgrounds, but it does include the definition. Yeah, it talks specifically about play areas and recreation areas in parks within a public park or a public recreation area.
Okay, all right, thank you. Just curious.
And that again does include state DNR facilities as well as local facilities.
Council just notes that there's a cross-reference, so you won't see it in the bill, but you can follow the trail of the cross-reference to see the definition. Okay.
Thank you.
I do not see any further questions for the sponsor or your panel. We do have another in-person favorable piece of testimony from Alita Jerry Carter.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Good afternoon, delegates. I am Alita Jerry Carter. I'm the CEO and founder of a nursing consultancy called Qual Equity Access. I'm a non-practicing pediatric nurse practitioner and the mother of 2 medically complex children with invisible disabilities. My older child has multiple diagnoses that have impacted and continue to impact her ability to communicate. My husband and I also had speech diagnoses that negatively impacted our childhoods. I am here today to support and to ask for favorable consideration of House Bill 420. I support this bill for the following reasons. According to the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, in 2012, approximately 1 in every 12 children ages 3 to 17 had a diagnosis that was related to voice, speech, language, or swallowing in the preceding 12 months. To bring you up to date, an article that was published in Contemporary Pediatrics, which is a peer-reviewed scholarly journal, reported that recent data revealed a 110% increase in speech disorder diagnosis for children aged 0 to 12 in 2022. So this is a pretty impactful piece of legislation that you have in your possession. Communication boards help children with communication challenges to communicate with their peers, their teachers, and other adults. Healthline states that these boards may increase autonomy by allowing users to make decisions about their own lives, as it allows them to communicate their needs, such as toileting, if they need to see a nurse, if they feel sick or hurt, or if someone is even being mean to them. And those are just a few of the lived experiences that I've had with my own children. Differently abled children may have different experiences of going to school or even just playing outside. When our children leave our homes, their chances of being understood or even being able to communicate effectively may substantially decrease. This presents a challenging situation for them, their peers, their teachers, camp counselors, childcare providers, and the list goes on for people who may not understand or be able to communicate with them. So thank you for your consideration. I do just ask that you take this opportunity with the power of the pen to actually not allow this to be a consideration of aftermath for future playgrounds, and that you allow this to increase accessibility and inclusion in the state of Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your personal experience. Any questions for this panelist? Okay, thank you very much. I understand the virtual favorable is not present, so we will move on. I'm just going to take, they're not similarly situated, but I'm going to take the favorable with amendment from DNR and the unfavorable from MACO. I'll just both of you come up here at the same time, please, and we can just knock this out. We can start with you, Dylan.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on this bill. My name is Dylan Baylor, representing the Department of Natural Resources here today. Firstly, I'd like to thank Delegate Lehman for her leadership on this bill. The department fully supports the intent of this legislation, and a top priority of the department and this administration is to make sure that our play areas and our state lands are as accessible as possible to every single Marylander. And we view this bill as doing just that. I did just want to touch on the two potential amendments on the, I guess, on the floor before us today. So our proposed amendment that we submitted in our testimony was on the original bill as drafted. Basically, what our proposed amendment did was it just struck the shall to a may as it related to the requirement of DNR to have to use program open space money to fund the construction of these projects. We just, as we viewed that, it would have required the use of program open space money instead of if there was another funding source available. The one key distinction that I wanted to point out between what our amendment was and the proposed amendment that we got from MACO and the delegate was that the proposed amendment that was included in the sponsor's testimony created a grant program and required the use of stateside program open space to fund the entirety of these construction projects. And while we appreciate the intent there, I think the one thing that we would want to have a conversation with the sponsor and MACO is to have a conversation about trying to make sure that both parties at the table are paying for the construction on their lands. DNR manages 38 playgrounds, play areas that we believe would be eligible and required under this legislation. And we are fully comfortable with making the investments with those. But as the sponsor mentioned, there is also program open space local side, which is funded through the transfer tax as well, which is distributed equally to all 24 jurisdictions in the state. And, we would just love to have a conversation about making sure there's equity amongst paying for the construction of these projects. So with that, I would request a favorable report with amendment and happy to take any questions.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, Dom with MACO. So first, I want to thank the delegate for being a leader on this bill. This is a really important issue. As it was drafted, MACO is opposed, and I want to be very clear on why. It's not because we dislike the concept. It's because program open space is one of the only things that is funding our parks and playground programs in the state of Maryland. Right now, for this fiscal year, program open space local side is going to be cut from $90 million to $30 million. Now, that is just a function of how the program operates, but program open space money, first of all, is usually accounted for years in advance because this is the only significant capital expenditure that we're getting, not only to build new parks, but also to do maintenance and to do certain programs. And so anything that cuts into local program open space is a really significant thing for programming and for future expansion. That being said, we did come up with some amendments that I was happy to work with the delegate on. And so if we can, make a little bit more ease around that cost, this is still an important issue. And so while we oppose the current draft, we are favorable with this amendment. Thank you.
Vice Chair Boyce.
I will be brief. Thank you, Dylan and Dom. Dylan, can you, I mentioned to earlier to the sponsor about potential, we talk about flexible resources and potential funding, wanted to talk about the Maryland Great Outdoors Act and how that potentially fits in to the delegates bill as it relates to additional funding sources potentially.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I think there's two kind of key parts of the GMOA as it relates to this bill. Firstly, The GMOA required the design and implementation of universal design standards across our state parks to make them more accessible to all Marylanders. We're currently in the process of doing that. The second part that I need to get additional clarification on from our budgetary folks is in the GMOA, there is the Capital Improvement and Acquisition Fund, which kind of distributed that money into different buckets, 30 million for land acquisition, 5 million for water access. But then there was language in the bill that said that if that fund received more than $70 million, then it could be used on a few different purposes, one of those being expanding accessibility. So the question that I will follow up with the committee on is, did that fund receive more than $70 million? And if the answer to that is yes, then I do believe we would have some additional resources to help fund this effort.
Sorry. And so as a follow-up to the point of changing shall to may, the may would help potentially provide additional resources should the committee decide to pass this bill. You would have the additional resources to be able to manage and take care of these signs. I mean, not manage, but fund the signs.
Yeah, I think I will get clarification on if that extra if the fund received more than $70 million, because that I think will be a big answer to that ultimate question. Our proposed amendments would allow, on the original bill as drafted, would allow other funds to be used.
Sure.
I think the proposed amendments create a grant fund.
Understood. Yep.
Yeah, that
Thank
has
you.
to be funded by state side.
Further questions? Okay, thank you both for being here. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 420. We'll now turn to HB 256. Delegate Dana Jones, Waterway Incident Notification System Work Group. And if you have a, oh no, looks like you're solo.
Thank you so much, Chair Corman and Vice Chair Boyce. Appreciate it. Members of the Environment and Transportation Committee, thank you so much. I come before you today to reintroduce HB 256, which would establish a waterway incident notification work group, the WINS work group. This work group would study the feasibility of establishing a waterway incident notification system to notify members of the public of active waterway emergencies involving a person at risk of death or serious bodily harm, emergency marine events, or marine hazards. This legislation has been introduced in response to a number of recent incidents in our state's waterways and is intended to improve the ability of members of the public to be aware of serious emergencies in their local waterways, both for their own safety and also so that they can assist in locating individuals reported as missing. As a representative of District 30A, we are accustomed on a regular basis to emergency communication issues that water goers face, including hazards on the water that are difficult to communicate with a large amount of boat traffic that we have on our bay. Two of our rivers, coves, creeks, lakes, all around the Annapolis area. We are surrounded by water on 3 sides here in my district. After discussions with the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, along with my cross file, I'm so proud to be working on this the past year and a half with Senator Jack Bailey. We had discussions with the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, and we determined that the best way to move forward is by forming a work group. This legislation will bring together representatives from MDEM, Natural Resources Police, the Department of Information Technology, 911 Board, and local emergency management officials, as well as members of the General Assembly, to determine the best way to create and implement such a system. Additionally, you'll find on your floor system that I had submitted a bill or a small amendment to this bill, which specifies protocols on appropriate conduct in their capacity as members of the work group. So as you all may remember, last year, I had 2 watermen join us in support of this legislation, and they spoke to the need of it. Unfortunately, they could not be with us today due to their schedules. The Senate has passed Senator Jack Bailey's cross-file version. I believe the committee, it's over on the House side now. And I have had the opportunity to speak with the vice chair on this. And let me say thank you so much for speaking with us on it. I appreciate that. And I look forward to working with the committee on the best way that we could move a work group, a study, or whatever seems suitable forward. I would just like to point out that the Maryland Department of Natural Resources does highlight in the information in your floor system that there is no current mass maritime notification system in the state of Maryland. And that they too are eager for the opportunity to participate in something in order to evaluate the feasibility of establishing a system of notifying those on the water of emergencies. For those who may not remember or aren't on the water as often as District 30A residents are, currently the only system for notifying mariners of an incident is through Marine Radio Channel 16, which is operated by the Coast Guard. And honestly, this requires, a lot of folks to be on marine radio, which has become increasingly rare on small vessels, since near everyone on the water really relies on their cell phones. So I just wanted to bring all of that up, and I appreciate the time. And I'm here for any questions. Hopefully, we can have a favorable report on House Bill 256 or something that resembles it. Sir.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Jones. First question is Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Jones. And so this is a quick question. Baltimore, I don't know if you had seen Baltimore County's testimony, and are you open to adding them to the work group?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Okay, I do not see, Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, I seem to recall that when you presented this bill last year, that you had a young but very effective advocate with you. How is he doing?
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up. And it's a shame that this didn't fall during spring break yet again. I can report that since that testimony that he was able to participate in, and because he attends Capitol Hill hearings with his father a little bit too much, he was quick to cover the mic, I think, as we all thought was hilarious. He was able to use that experience and your questioning in order to receive a Boy Scout merit badge when he reported on his experience with this very committee. So I thank you actually for that question. So I could be one of those moms who talks about their kids.
Great. Glad to hear. Thank you.
Any further questions about Delegate Jones's personal life? Okay, thank you for the bill. That concludes the bill on HB 256. We'll now turn to HB 293. Delegate Aaron's.
Thank you.
State Boat Act, abandoned or sunken recreational vessels, identification and removal.
Mr. Chair, can I bring up my panel? Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Delegate Steve Aaron's representing HB 293. This is a bill that's been brought on, and it's really through the purpose of my Queen Anne's County Commissioners, but it kind of reflects some of the issues we have across the board, across the state. So today, HB 293 expands the definition of abandoned or sunken recreational vessel in the State Boat Act. This bill would authorize DNR to seize and remove recreational vessels that have either been tied to private property without the owner's permission for more than 60 days or have been anchored and unattended in the same location for more than 60 days. The bill also establishes that DNR must consider and document certain details about the vessel when they are determining whether it is abandoned or sunken. This bill is kind of serious for us at least in my county and for the people that live on the water. Back when I was a county commissioner years ago, we would find that some of the coves, we have a lot of anchorages there, and a lot of the people will put a boat there, they'll tie it up and they leave it. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when they leave it and it gets in distress, that boat can sink. That boat can sink, and then it becomes a hazard in the waterway because you don't see a boat that's underwater typically. We also get some problems with some kids. They'll jump on these boats. They'll see them sitting there for ever and ever, and they go out there and they play on them, and the dangers that exposes them to. Where these boats are, like I said, it's always going to be on waterfront property. And when you're looking out of your window at a boat that's been abandoned and sitting for weeks and months and years, it becomes a little bit problematic for the people that own the property. We've even had instances in Queen Anne's County where somebody would have a boat, they tie it up to the pier, like the anchorage right next to where the boat ramp is, and they leave it there. And what happens, and by the code, I believe, if you can tie that boat up there, all you have to do is it sinks. All you have to do is go back out there and pump that boat out again and leave it for another 60 days or 90 days, and then it will do the same thing. So we're trying to eliminate some of these problems, and I have a couple people here to testify with me. And at this point, I'll turn it over. So your name and
I'm Regis Peter Nell. I'm from Queen Anne's County, one of the residents on Thompson Creek. Let me read this to you.
Just pull the mic closer to you.
Oh, I'm
It'll
sorry.
bend. Yeah,
Here,
there
how's
you go.
that? Better?
Perfect.
Okay, as private citizens of Maryland, the residents along Thompson Creek in Queen Anne's County are asking the General Assembly for a positive vote in support of House Bill 293, the State Boat Act. The problems my neighbors and I face is the actions of irresponsible boat owners mooring in Maryland waters. My testimony is witness to 13 years of irresponsible activity adjacent to the Thompson Creek boat landing, where 24 wooden mooring piles exist. My neighbors and I have witnessed the arrival, abandonment, and removal of at least 13 derelict boats in the last 13 years. We have witnessed, these craft break free from their moorings, stray randomly with the tide, and then damage private piers at the expense of the homeowner. There was an incident of one derelict vessel graffitied with racial slurs. We have witnessed these boats sink while still moored, resulting in pollution to the creek from fuel, trash, human waste, and various floating debris. My neighbors and I have participated in the monitoring of these derelict vessel arrivals. We've alerted DNR of their sinkings and their breakaways, and have helped clean up the creek and the public landing because of this irresponsible behavior. Tragically, in 2022, one death was also occurred on one of these derelict vessels while moored, while moored in Thompson Creek. One thing these 13 irresponsible boat owners had in common is they all tied their derelict vessels to privately owned mooring poles in Thompson Creek. These poles were installed over the years and ownership is not recorded. We believe these irresponsible boat owners need to be held accountable for the risk they pose to the surrounding private property and the environment of the Maryland waters.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chairs and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Bruce Beriano. I'm here on behalf of the County Commissioners of Queen Anne's County in very strong support of this legislation. This is very important legislation in Queen Anne's County. There may be other counties that could benefit from it as well. All of you have gone to Ocean City, you've gone over the Bay Bridge. You see, particularly in the Ken Island area, the extensiveness of the waterfront on that part of Queen Anne's County. And this is a real problem. And because it's in the waters of the state, the county does not have the jurisdiction unless statutorily they're given to it, was what we're asking this committee and legislature in order to have more tools to deal with a real problem. And in addition to the points that were made by the sponsor and the gentleman that just spoke, there's also an environmental pollution problem because these boats, not just by their sinking and everything, if they're there and you have either gasoline or oil in the engine and it starts decaying and rusting and pollutes the waters of that area, that's not good for the environment. That's what this committee is all about. Now, I understand, I'll just say in conclusion, I understand, I don't know what they're going to say, but DNR is opposing this bill. If there's a cost factor, I just think we could have conversation and really see what it's all about and work it out. We just need some more tools to deal with this as it relates to recreational vessels. And I will work with the secretary and the department after I hear their testimony to come to some resolutions and hopefully with the permission of this committee, give Queen Anne's County some more tools to deal with a very real problem as was explained by the sponsor and the other witness. Thank you very much. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Beriano. Is your virtual witness a part of your panel as well?
I believe he's there, yes. Mr. Wood?
Yes,
Yes.
he's a part of your panel.
Yes,
We'll take
yes.
him and then we'll take questions. Okay, we will take questions at this time.
Madam
I
Speaker,
see.
Can I add one thing? There is a friendly amendment to this, a clarifying amendment. I just want to make you aware of it. It's just defining what a sunken boat is. That's all.
Yes, sir. Delegate Otto and then Delegate Silverberg.
My question is for the sponsor. Have you ever had a boat get away from its moorings?
That's a pretty funny question.
And how was that resolved?
Yeah, yes, I have had a boat during a storm. Thank you for the question. Sorry.
Are you done, Delegate Otto?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Delegate Silverberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not into boats or anything like that. I have nothing against them. But when you have a boat, you obviously bought the thing or somehow acquired it. And can't you trace the owner? Why is that difficult?
Well, some of these boats could be just dories that you use to get out to your boat. It could be like if you have a sailboat that's anchored out, you could do that. Some of them are old work boats that have been laying around for a while. Some of them are just old enough that you just don't really want to pay attention to them anymore.
These boats are recreational boats, people, excuse me. And they've been towed into Thompson Creek because they don't run. They tow them in, they park them. I had one guy live on one for about 4 years until he finally died out there. Other ones have come in, they've stayed at the landing. They go from the landing out to the boat, they party, they come back, they quit pumping the bilges out. These things do not run. They're big behemoths that their time has passed and they don't have the money to put into them. This is a problem. When they roll over, the fuel comes out, the human waste comes out, all the trash comes out, and you know who picks it up? People like me. And we're fed up with it. If we can hold these people accountable to be able to give witness as to they have permission to use these mooring poles, it'll clean up a lot of this. These mooring poles have been put out there very let's say casually over the years with good intention. But no one looks after them. They're not registered, they're not identified, we don't know who owns them. But if I go out and I tie a derelict vessel to it, and this law is in force, someone's going to come up to me after 60 days and say, you need to show evidence that you have permission to be here. And I probably won't be able to do it. And hopefully that'll deter some of this irresponsible boat owner behavior. But these are recreational junks. Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good.
No, thank you so much, Delegate Naraki, and then we'll take Delegate Foley, and then we'll go back to our virtual witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate, this is a big problem in Baltimore County as well. In my district and other parts of Eastern Baltimore County, we have a lot of these abandoned and other kinds of vessels as well. I wanted to ask, had you seen the favorable with amendment letter submitted by Baltimore County to your bill here?
I didn't see it, but I'd add anybody who wants to be on. I think it should be a statewide.
Sure. So they asked basically if you'd be willing to allow DNR to designate another entity to handle the removal of the abandoned vessel.
You know, our interest is in getting this resolved. So whoever removes it, that's up to them. But there are some ramifications when you start adding different parties, different layers to this. You know, I think Delegate Otto asked a question about my boat. I found out when I had to get my boat towed over this last storm, it was incredible. It was sitting on a dock and it was $6,200 to take my boat off this dock, which all they did was hook a line to it and put it over to a mooring. So that's a problem when you start looking at some of these things. I don't know if that's a viable option, but it'd be something to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Not all of these people are malicious. I will say that because I've dealt with a few people over the years.
I would just say, Madam Vice Chair, this is a statewide bill proposal, not just Queen Anne's County. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. My question kind of is a follow-up to Delegate Naraki's question, but it has to do with DNR. And I know we're going to hear, it looks like we're going to hear from DNR in opposition to this bill. And my question, I mean, I really appreciate that this is a problem. Clearly it is. And it's something that, needs to be addressed. But I just wondered, Delegate, if you've talked to DNR about addressing some of the concerns. And Mr. Bariano, DNR was not a monetary concern on the part of DNR. It wasn't a fiscal concern. It was more a concern of liability and the rights of owners. And I mean, they go into great detail about the problems they have with the bill. And I just wondered if you had any discussions with them about it.
I did speak, but when we look at the liability, they're doing this now. There are instances where we have actually succeeded in calling DNR to say this boat is a problem, it's sinking, it's doing this, that, and the other. So we're addressing this now. I think part of the problem is the ability to get to them, staffing and what have you. This is not a minor job. It's time consuming, and you do have to go through the rigmarole of trying to figure out actually who owns the boat, and the notifications and the processes here would be like me trying to take over your home. You have to do homework to get this done, but it is a problem. And by saying that we're not going to address it because it's a problem, doesn't solve the problem. It's not going to help us. So there has to be a way. There is a vehicle to do it today, I'm certain, because I've had it done. It's just a matter of this may or may not increase, but believe me, any problem that I think DNR could have, they're having that problem today with this. It's not going to add exponentially. Every time you have a boat that's a problem, somebody's making that call today. It's just not getting handled.
Well, thank you, Delegate. But I would encourage you to try to work with DNR because I think we do have to resolve this problem.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's
We'll
anything
do
to
that,
do.
Delegate.
Yeah.
I will.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to just follow up with that, go to our virtual and then go to Delegate Davis. But the letter essentially says in 2020, legislation was passed to address some of these issues. And so the question for me is, what is not, in your opinion, covered in the 2020 legislation that you would want covered in this legislation? Because I think they're saying that you're trying to establish new criteria for determining a vessel that has been abandoned or something.
I would say the new criteria is something we're asking them to be accountable to actually do the follow-up. If you come out there and I tell you a boat's been abandoned, to get that information, because what's happening out there, with all due respect, is these boats are going to be pumped out. They are sinking. They go out there and they literally pump them out. And that boat now is there for another eternity because they've satisfied what the requirements were in the past. And that's happened. Well, thank you.
So these are additional criteria, Delegate, that your bill has.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Mr. Wood, you can go right ahead.
Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair and Committee, for the opportunity to offer support and seek your favorable recommendation for House Bill 293. My name is James Wood. I work for Queen Anne's County. My title is Public Landing Supervisor. Public landings are the interface point between public county land and the waters of the state. We believe HB 293 will help deter and address an ongoing problem of abandoned recreational boats. It will enhance the existing very successful abandoned boat law, Natural Resources Article 8721, a law that we're very glad already exists in Maryland. Other states aren't so lucky to have a way to address this conveyor belt of old recreational boats. HB 293 will do this by expanding and clarifying the existing abandoned boat law to include boats that are moored and anchored in state waters. Boats that are tied to moorings will have to have that permission from the owner of or the person in control of that mooring apparatus, which might be a pole or a mooring anchor, as well as regular anchors. The existing law addresses boats abandoned at marinas and public property and is very successful, and we work with them all the time, and I want to applaud DNR, both the NRP and the DNR folks that come and get the boats, often with their own resources. And it will clearly add these boats that are abandoned on moorings and anchors. It will also expand the criteria to, make sure that this boat has a current registration, that there's signs that they're removing water from the bilge, the condition of the boat, and also the condition of the lines that secure the boat. We had the recent amendment we're favorable to about if it presents a potential health or environmental hazard. So we're just asking to expand an already good law to include moorings. Thank you for the opportunity we look forward to your favorable support.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wood. Delegate Davis.
Chair. My question is, I know you have a problem, And I'm wondering if, as I make my decision, do the boats that pose the problem usually have current registration?
It's a mix. Some of them will, some of them will, the majority of them, I would say, do not. We have 2 of them right now in inventory, as we call it. We inventory all the boats in our landing every 30 days, and I submit that information to Parks and Recreation. But 2 of those boats, there's 2 there, 1 does not, and it hasn't been registered since 1997. And one of the biggest issues with these things is the sinking, et cetera, like that. But because they're people lose interest in them, the mooring devices begin to fail. And when I'm saying mooring device, I'm talking about the lines. They'll break during wind and heavy weather. And what happens is they run into someone's private property, their boat, their pier. If something like that hits my pier, I pay the first $2,500. The rest of it's covered by my insurance company. That boat owner, if you can find him, pays $0. So it's that part of it too, is the risk that these things pose to us as private landowners.
If I could follow up, Madam Chair. So if it's currently registered, we could charge the current owner or the current registrant with removing the boat. I mean, could we add that to the bill?
I believe that's what we do today.
That's what you do today.
Yeah, that's how it's handled. If it's registered, you can get somebody, you got a person and a body to talk to. That doesn't mean it'll be moved, but you got a whole lot better shot.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there any other questions for this panel? Seeing none, I want to move to Ellie
Thank you, Madam
Bassett.
Chair.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you.
Arundel
Thank you.
Rivers Federation, favorable with amendments. Welcome, Ms. Bassett. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Ellie Bassett. I am your Southwest Road River Keeper with Arundel Rivers Federation. We work to protect and restore and preserve those waterways, those 3 waterways, which are south of us right now where we're sitting in Anne Arundel County. I also was formerly the Miles Y River Keeper on the Eastern Shore. So putting on my Eastern Shore hat and saying thank you to the Queen Anne's County Commissioners and the delegate for sponsoring this important bill. As we've mentioned multiple times, and as you've heard today, this is not specific to the Eastern Shore. My first day on the job as your Southwest Road River Keeper, literally first day, I had 3 reports of sunken or abandoned vessels within the Southwest and Road rivers. All 3 of those vessels were anchored. So it's very important that we are adding anchored vessels to this legislation as well as moored vessels. It took me about 11 months for action to take place on one of those vessels to get it towed. And it also took private donations from a donor and a private tow company to eventually handle it. I want to say that, we're very supportive of this, but we do have a friendly amendment, which I think is the amendment that the delegate mentioned, but it's to add an additional item to the list of criteria for consideration and documentation of a sunken and abandoned vessel, which is just that if the vessel poses an environmental or public health threat, that should also be in consideration. And we heard from most of our panel today that these vessels can absolutely present an environmental and public health hazard. I also want to reference a couple other water quality organizations submitted testimony in favor of this amendment, including the Potomac Conservancy and Shore Rivers on the Eastern Shore. So again, this is a bay-wide issue. So with that, I want to thank the delegate, and I ask you for a favorable report with amendments on HB 293. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bassett. Is there any questions for Ms. Bassett? Seeing none, we will move to our next individual who is, it looks like the Department of Natural Resources. Yes, sir. Ingerson, Mr. Ingerson?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. You have 2 minutes. Please state your name for the record and begin when you're ready.
I'm Major Lloyd Ingerson, Maryland Natural Resources Police, Chief of Special Services. I'm here today representing the Department of Natural Resources in opposition to House Bill 293. Before I tell you some of the things in this bill that concern the department, let me first say that the department does realize that we are on the cusp of a very big problem with the first generation of fiberglass boats. Those boats are getting very old now and have outlived their life expectancy. People are and will be trying to dispose of these boats. And it is very costly to do that. So, you know, if it's done improperly, these boats definitely do become hazardous to the environment and to navigation, and we don't want that. You know, we appreciate the efforts of many lawmakers that are trying to address this issue during the session and help us find a solution to the problem. There is other legislation this session to push the needle forward on this issue of disposing of unwanted boats. The department is supporting legislation that would authorize the creation of the vessel turn-in program to help get these boats off the water before they do become a problem. I'm not going to rehash everything that's in the bill report. You all have that. I would just say that, you know, this bill does create a new class of abandoned vessel. And in some cases, these vessels are not a hazard to navigation or to the environment. They just haven't been attended for 60 days. It's not tied to any type of real problem that they're causing. With regard to moorings, we do issue moorings, but when we issue a permit for a mooring, it is a permit to put a mooring there, but it does not convey ownership. Anyone can use that mooring.
Thank you for your testimony. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Ingerson? I'm sorry, Mr. Jacobs, please.
Thank you so much. Major Ingerson, I thank you for being here today. And, you know, we've had this issue in this committee for several years. It's not new. The problem seems to be ongoing, and as you indicated with this first generation fiberglass boat, probably adding more to the problem. Is there any way that you and the department could work with Delegate Aronson and try and come up with something perhaps to make this workable, that we can keep pushing forward and get something in here with some teeth to deal with this issue? Because it's probably been 6 or 7 years that we've been dealing with legislation that's sort of related to this.
Yes.
Does the department have like maybe their list of what they'd like to see happen, that we could maybe amend something and all come together and hopefully deal with this issue before it gets ahead of us? Because we've had this Baltimore County issue has been serious several years ago, and other I mean, anywhere you got water access in the state of Maryland, you're going to have a boat abandonment problem or neglect problem. So is there any way we can work with something instead of saying no? Can we all come together?
We would be more than happy to work with anyone to find a solution to this problem. As a matter of fact, Delegate Aronson and I had a conversation this morning about it to start working in that direction. It's not that we oppose the concept. It's just some of the language is troublesome.
Well, perhaps we can come up with an amended version. Thank you.
Welcome.
Vice Chair Boyce.
Thank you, Major. You mentioned that there is another bill about turning in a vessel. Can you say what bill number that is?
Yes, that is Senate Bill 674.
And there is no House bill?
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
And you said 764?
674.
Woo, okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? And there is a House Bill 1461. Delegate Davis is quick on the computer. Well, thank you very much. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 293. We'll now turn to HB 305. Welcome back, Delegate Wilkins. Outdoor lighting standards and use of state funds. And I want to make sure everyone saw in the kitchen, Delegate Wilkins left some snacks. So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Hello, Madam Vice Chair and the entire committee. I am back again today on a much simpler bill, and I am pleased to present House Bill 305. I'm Delegate Janelle Wilkins, Outdoor Lighting Standards and Use of State Funds. This bill is truly an example of democracy in action, in the sense that my constituent Lisa was impacted by the installation of very harsh lighting that beamed very aggressively into her home and impacted her sleep and her health. So after she brought this issue to me, we realized that our state does not have consistent updated standards when it comes to the use of outdoor lighting, and that's why we brought this bill. I have shared with the committee an amendment to the bill, and the amendment is due to Maryland Department of Environment notifying us that they felt they did not have the staffing or the expertise to lead the provisions of the bill. So we shifted it to the Maryland Green Buildings Council, which is under Department of General Services, and DGS has indicated they are able to manage the provisions of this bill. So I'll discuss the bill with the proposed amendment that has the Green Buildings Council leading. The bill with the amendment, it requires that the Maryland Green Buildings Council them to update and develop guidance for the purchase of outdoor lighting fixtures in consideration of light pollution and color temperature best practices. It also ensures that the use of state funds for permanent outdoor lighting in parks, trails, and highways has a light temperature equal to or less than 3,000 Kelvin. This bill is important not only because we don't want constituents like Lisa to be impacted by harsh public lighting, but also because light affects our environment, our climate, as well as wildlife behavior and reproduction. So today is Valentine's Day, and we love our constituents, and they will truly appreciate this bill. This bill has the support of the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters. I want to mention that I'm very honored to be joined by our former colleague, Al Carr, and I urge a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Also have to point out that former Delegate Carr was a member of this committee for a while, so welcome back, Delegate Carr.
Let's go next. All right, yeah, you've outed me. I know some of you, you know who you are, recognize me as a former member of the committee, but it's great to be back, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, and it's great to see the continued strong leadership, thoughtful committee members, and superb staffing. So for the record, I'm Al Carr. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Sierra Club in favor of House Bill 305. You have our written testimony, but I'll just emphasize a few points. First, this is a good bill. It's good for taxpayers, good for humans, and good for wildlife. It's a common sense bill. For over a decade, Maryland has had this policy in our statute. I was the author of the 2011 law that requires state-funded outdoor lighting at state buildings to be energy efficient and shielded. House Bill 305 is a modest expansion of that proven approach. It expands the requirements to more types of state-funded outdoor lighting, including on highways, parks, and trails. It's a cost-effective approach. It only applies prospectively, so for new lights, but it doesn't affect existing lights. Efficient shielded light fixtures are not more expensive, but they're actually cheaper to operate, and they can provide better visibility at night. There's a waiver provision, so it's very flexible for any special circumstances through the Board of Public Works. And House Bill 305 reflects the best practices. It puts Maryland on par with at least 14 other states from coast to coast that have statutes like this, including Arizona, Arkansas, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Texas, Virginia. So we'll be in good company. There's a new provision to the bill to address the color of the lights. It is based on the 2016 guidance from the American Medical Association that the warmer yellowish white light is better for human health and wildlife than the colder bluish white light. So we ask for your favorable report, and happy to answer any questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Capriolio. I am a resident of District 20 and submitting this testimony in support of House Bill 305, Development of Outdoor Lighting Standards. Thank you, Delegate Wilkins, for listening to my concerns and sponsoring this bill. Outdoor lighting is a public health issue. Excessively bright white lights on Long Branch Trail have negatively impacted my life every night since they were installed in January of 2022. The new LED lights were 10 times brighter than recommended by the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America, and the color temperature was significantly whiter than the recommended 2,200 Kelvin. I could not sleep. The lights disrupt my body's circadian rhythms. There have been news articles about the effect of blue lights on phones, from our phones on sleep, and the park lights are order of magnitude brighter than phones. I contacted Montgomery Parks requesting a change, and they emailed this response, quote, "The recent upgrades of the lights are part of our routine maintenance efforts. and the lighting is the type used throughout our park system. The lighting is directed toward the trail in accordance with parks installation practices, and our staff has determined the lighting is appropriate for the need it serves. With these considerations in mind, the lights will not be altered." End quote. This is not limited to Montgomery Parks. New lights on the Carroll Avenue Bridge over Sligo Creek are bright white. New lights on Park Valley Bridge over Sligo Creek are bright white. This underscores the need for House Bill 305. Existing rules on outdoor lighting do not take current scientific standards into account. Staff with no special training make decisions affecting public health. Science must take precedence over intuition.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the sponsor of this panel, Delegate Guyton?
So much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for bringing the bill. I'm really interested in this. It's actually something that we've had issues with in my own district in the past. And I'm looking through this. I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking. You're primarily asking the department or general services or whoever ends up doing this, Department of Environment, to just take these things into account. But other than the restriction on lights above a certain lumen light temperature, other than that, the 3000 Kelvin, are there any other restrictions that you're putting into the bill, or are you just saying do the right thing for people and animals? And the reason I'm asking particular is I know that there are what's considered dark sky lighting operations, and I was kind of looking to see how this correlated with that, because that's something we've been fighting for in our more rural districts so that they don't disturb the wildlife and the rural nature. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Delegate. So dark skies, that's exactly what this bill is. If you look at the existing law, it says that new lighting should be energy efficient. It should be shielded. It should be the minimum necessary for the purpose. So it is very much about making sure that light is shining downward where it is helpful onto pathways and roadways, and not being wasted going upwards or sideways into people's bedroom windows or on the bottom of clouds.
Thank you. That is exactly the right answer, and I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, thanks for this bill. I actually have the last operating drive-in movie theater in my district, and they have had considerable challenges with streetlights from a state highway, affecting the screen. It's behind where the screen is. I realize that this is for new lighting, but how do you see this bill potentially playing into a situation like that, where we have a business that's having significant challenges from the lighting from a state highway?
Thank you, Delegate. Well, first of all, that is interesting to know about the drive-in theater, and I hope to be invited to come check
We
it
would
out.
love to have you out there, Baltimore County, anytime you are.
That's awesome. But on that, because the bill is prospective and it would apply to new fixtures that are being put up, it probably would not relate to that one unless there was a change made where a fixture was taken down and then put back up. I think that it would then apply, but perhaps we can figure out some ways that the bill could apply to some situations like that where you have light that's really, really bothersome.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Delegate Holmes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Carr, it's good to see you. Good to see you.
See you too.
Can you, Delegate Carr, explain to this committee what a buckeye is? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
A buckeye is it grows on a tree called a buckeye tree. It's like a nut or something. So it comes from Ohio.
Can you tell us what else comes from Ohio for the new members of the committee?
Well, we have Delegate Holmes is from Ohio. So
I
there you
love
go.
it.
Anybody else
Chair of
testifying
the
right
Buckeye
now?
Caucus. I was once in the Buckeye Caucus, and also Delegate Kathy Forbes.
You good? All right. Delegate Wilkins, tell your constituent we do take this seriously. It's just a little lighthearted fun with our former colleague. Any further questions? Okay, thank you for the bill. That concludes the bill hearing on HB 305. We'll now turn to HB 345. Delegate Polakovich Carr, Fish and Wildlife, Endangered and Threatened Species, Definitions, Petitions, and Regulations. We have a panel. Yep.
There's, I think, 3 folks.
So good afternoon, colleagues. For the record, I'm Delegate Julie Plockvich-Carr here to present House Bill 345. So this bill would ensure the continued protection of our state's biodiversity by codifying existing state practices and regulations regarding endangered species protections. So a little bit of context, because it has been a few years since there was a bill regarding the Endangered Species Act that's been heard by the General Assembly. You're likely familiar with the Federal Endangered Species Act. We also have a state law that mirrors many of those provisions. The federal law and state law together have been very successful in saving hundreds of species from extinction over the years and in fully recovering many iconic species like the bald eagle, grizzly bears, and humpback whales. So under federal law, Maryland and other states have formal agreements with the federal government to protect federally listed species and any state identified species of concern. Maryland's protections for rare animals and plants are working very well. That was documented in a report released last year from the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. And in looking through that report, I really did see how well Maryland's existing protections are stacking up compared to other states. As some of you know, in my former professional life, I trained as a wildlife biologist. My master's thesis was actually on a federally protected species, the Canada lynx. I was doing my work in Minnesota. And the lab that I worked in was helping to basically inform the recovery of that protected species. So it really was that self-interest that led me to dig a little bit deeper in terms of Maryland's current practices. And that's where I realized that some of the things that NCL was flagging in this report that Maryland was doing well are not actually in law. They are existing practices, or in one case in regulations. So this bill simply codifies those existing practices. First, the bill requires that our state's lists of protected animals and plants be updated every 5 years. DNR already does this, and that time frame is in line with the practices of at least 19 other states. Second, the bill codifies DNR's existing interpretation of the definition of an animal that is potentially eligible for protected status. Maryland already protects a variety of animals, including mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, as well as insects, mollusks, and other invertebrates. This bill, and along with the sponsor amendment I've submitted to the committee, aligns state law with DNR's current scope, as well as with federal law and the practices of at least 24 other states. Third, the bill codifies existing state regulations that require scientific evidence to be presented before species can be added or removed from the protected species list. So let me finish by reiterating that this bill is just codifying what DNR is already doing and making sure that these good practices are enshrined in state law going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan McKnight. I'm a biologist with the Department of Natural Resources. My job and my calling is to take care of all of the plants and animals that we have in the state, which are not hunted, fished, or grown on farms. We constantly track thousands of plants and animals and keep lists of what is rare, threatened, and endangered animals and plants that are protected by law in Maryland. And when the status of a species changes, we recommend changes to the Secretary in those regulations. House Bill 345 cleans up some of that language about what constitutes fish and wildlife and how to list them. It sets a schedule for the department to bring forward changes to those lists. And it's a minimal schedule, so it requires that we do everything within a certain period of time, but it doesn't prevent us from doing that more often if, in fact, we need to do it. It's a positive change, and on the behalf of the department, I urge the committee to look favorably upon the bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kim Fullerton. I'm a legislative liaison with the Maryland State Bar Association, and I also teach animal law at the University of Maryland School of Law. So today we're just talking about best practices for maintaining and updating our state list of endangered species. I'm going to quickly talk about why that's important at the state level, federal level, and internationally. But first, I wanted to touch base on what counts as an endangered species. Who decides that? Well, we throw that word around a lot, but who decides? So there's 3 levels. There's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. That's a global treaty. 170 countries participate, and they're kind of the gold standard. They keep what's called a red list, which is just an inventory of all the species and what their conservation statuses are. Then we have the federal legislation, which you're probably familiar with, and our sponsor mentioned briefly. That's the Endangered Species Act. It has the species listed and then also some statutory regulations. And then what's great is Maryland. Maryland keeps our own list as well. So getting into why this is important at a state level, we have amazing creatures in our state. We have the smallest and rarest sea turtle in the world. We have the largest mammal in the world, the blue whale. We have the monarch butterfly, beautiful creature. And so it's important that we protect these animals. Second, it's important on a federal level because these lists are not the same. Maryland, our list has 566 species, but only 7% have made it to the federal list. So that means that there's over 500 of our species that we in our state recognize as being endangered that are not protected by the feds. Also, it's important on the international level because University of Maryland is a secretariat for the IUCN. That's a huge honor. So we have a chance, we already have a seat at the table and we need to exercise that. And so by providing the data from this bill, we'll be able to best protect our state's resources. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Bevan Dangle. I'm the State Director for the Humane Society of the United States here in Maryland. I think you've heard amply about the bill. We strongly support this bill because it will help us create a, this finer tuned sense of what's happening with our populations. We strongly support the 5-year. It's, it is in 19 states and it has been our practice, but codifying that is critically important. So the hour is late. I will simply say, please support this legislation.
Thank you. Any questions for the sponsor of our panel? Okay, I do not see any. We do have an additional favorable witness, Lisa Radoff, Maryland Votes for Animals.
Hello, Lisa Radoff again, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Maryland Votes for Animals is here in support of this bill for all of the reasons that you just heard. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Thank you so much to our sponsor. We very much hope that you all will support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing HB 345. We will turn to our final bill of the afternoon, HB 438. Delegate Hornberger, fishing licenses and stamps, fee exemptions, residents eligible for assistance programs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Kevin Hornberger here on behalf of HB 438. Fishing license and stamps fee exemption for residents eligible for assistance programs. This bill is very simple and straightforward and basically opts a new cohort into receiving a free fishing license. We've heard the adage, teach a man to fish and he eats for a lifetime. We believe that currently this population is being excluded from the ability to fish, feed their families, and participate in recreation. I did want to clarify on the fiscal note. Unfortunately, the bill writers wrote the fiscal note as such that everyone that was eligible for SNAP benefits would receive the license. However, we've clarified that and it's only for folks that are already enrolled. So that takes the onus off of DNR and it makes that fiscal note a lot smaller. We also have an amendment that's included in your packet that would be a revenue offset to whereas the funds would be reimbursed from the general fund. So there would be no loss for the DNR. So with that, we also have a cross file. I'd love to take any questions.
Thank you. I have a quick question first. That's all right, Madam Vice Chair. So sorry, with those amendments, what do you think the fiscal note is?
We believe that it would be around with the smaller population would be less than half.
And I apologize. I don't have the fiscal note open in front of me, and you probably do. So what is
sorry? So the fiscal note now is at 800,000. We believe that it would be significantly less, around 400.
Great, thank you.
But we're awaiting numbers on that from DNR. We hope to have them available.
Okay, Vice Chair Boyce.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Delegate Hornberger. Good to see you. I have
Yes, glad
a
to
ton
be
of
back.
notes when I was reading this bill. So I
Yep.
guess the question for me is how many individuals in the past have attempted to purchase a license and could not, or had mentioned a hardship in purchasing a license?
So currently, the only population that I know of that is exempt from the fee would be your disabled veterans. So in terms of how would we capture folks that went to purchase it and didn't have the funds to do so, there's no recording of that. They would just be denied the license. And what we feel is most likely happening for that specific population is that they are fishing illegally without a license. And should they be caught doing so, they're now on the hook, no pun intended, for fishing without a
So
license.
Delegate Hornberger, if I'm correct, the problem you're trying to solve is that there are individuals who either can't gain access or don't have the appropriate funds to buy a license, therefore fishing illegally. And then I guess my next question would be, then why not a discounted license?
The license currently is for if you're a resident, I think is around, it's less than $100. So it's depending on what level, and we have 4 levels here: trout stamp, Chesapeake Bay, and coastal.
Sure, and I guess again, the question is a free versus a discounted?
Right,
Just a question.
Yeah, we feel that zeroing it out will give them the ability to get it, because if they can't afford it already, a discount. So in other words, it's not as if it's a $5,000 license and we would reduce it to them for a few hundred.
I get it,
it's
but you're
already
also
in-
saying you don't have a number. You don't know. We don't know who otherwise is being quote unquote denied because they don't have the money, but you also mentioned that there's illegal fishing. So do we have a number of how many folks illegally fish, therefore that they don't have a license to fish?
Not segregated by income. So we do have a number of people that get caught every year without,
Do you know
fishing
what
without
that
a
number
license.
is?
But it wouldn't be dependent on their income.
I know, but you mentioned that as one of the potential causes or the problems you're trying to solve. So I'm trying to get an idea of how many of those like how many people illegally fish without a license? Do you know?
I don't, but keep in mind that, DNR, and we did work to bump up their staff, especially in the enforcement arm over the last 2 years, this body did. Many times the places where people are fishing are remote, and
Sure.
it's difficult for DNR to cover all of these places. So another touch point that it wasn't brought up is that by someone going and getting a fishing license, should this bill pass, they're now interacting with the DNR in a legal manner. And the DNR can communicate with them. I hold a fishing and hunting license, and the DNR has my email address.
Sure.
They communicate with me regularly. So in essence, we're bringing that population into being compliant and have access to these public resources in a legal way.
But otherwise could access it with the exception of the cost, to your point.
Yes, that's
Thank you.
correct. Yeah, thank you. Good, great questions.
Any further questions?
Yeah, man, take a look at there's some testimony in there from the agency as well.
Delegate Guyton?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm talking a lot today because one of our colleagues yesterday told me I hadn't spoken up at all this session. But no, I really care about these issues. So this is just to clarify.
Mhm.
Did I hear you say that you wanted to improve access for people who couldn't get licenses by passing this bill, but it was only going to be available to people who currently have licenses?
No, they
No,
have to-
okay, I
they have
missed
to be
that.
low
I-
income. Yep, they have to be
Low income who have
and-
licenses.
And the way that, the easiest way to determine
Right.
that someone low income is via the SNAP benefit.
I'm sorry, I'm still confused. So it's going to replace the payment that they're currently paying. It's not going to add new licenses, or is it?
No, so if they're currently buying a license and they have SNAP, they would be eligible to get that license now for free, I think is the question that you're asking.
Yeah.
Additionally, if they were on SNAP and they had never previously bought a license, or all of a sudden decided they wanted to go fishing, they can now go and present that credential and receive that license for free at no
Okay, I
cost.
think I just heard something incorrectly. I appreciate that clarification because that wasn't making sense. So how did you half the fiscal note?
How to what?
How did you cut the fiscal note in half?
So we changed the fiscal note around because when the bill drafters wrote this, they wrote it in such a way that it was everyone that is currently eligible for SNAP, not those that are actually enrolled in SNAP.
Community eligibility period. Okay.
As if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what I heard, but obviously it was incorrect. I'm
And
glad you fixed it.
and
Thank you.
we are working with DLS to update the fiscal note. So we'll provide that information as soon as we have it available.
Thanks so much.
Of course, as you know, they're over leveraged right now.
Okay. I do not see, oh, sorry, Delegate Baker.
Back to your SNAP question, or I have a question for SNAP. So if it's a family of 8, they're all, several of them are at, the age where they would have to purchase a license.
Yep.
Does that SNAP benefit only apply to one family member or all family members over 16?
It's all under 16 as long as they're in the household. So if
Well,
you're.
I didn't think you had to pay for a license if you're under 16.
Correct, you don't, but you said the ones that are above 16.
So they would have to purchase a license to fish. So would that SNAP benefit qualify everybody in the family above the age 16 or older to have free license?
As long as they can prove that they have SNAP benefit.
Okay.
So two qualifiers.
So I don't know,
Over
I don't know,
over
I don't know
16.
if they,
Yep.
I don't know if the mother, the father is the SNAP beneficiary or if it includes the whole entire family.
Yeah, typically all the adults that are eligible in a household
Thank you.
will receive SNAP benefit
Thank you.
if they're fully utilizing the program. Great
Okay.
questions.
That concludes, we're known for our great questions. I'm glad you noticed.
Yeah.
That concludes the bill hearing on HB 438 and our hearings for the day. Colleagues on
Thank
the
you so much.
committee. Thank you, Delegate Hornberger. Just a couple of notes on the schedule. So one, we'll be voting on Friday. We'll have a voting session Friday afternoon. And 2, I don't want to get ahead of the speaker, but whatever you hear about the schedule Friday, we have committee hearings. We have bill hearings on Friday and those can't be moved. So whatever you hear, we have bill hearings on Friday and we do bill hearings in person. So just keep that in mind based on whatever you hear out there in the world. With that, committee announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Environment Subcommittee will meet virtually at 5 o'clock.
Thank you, Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Housing and Real Property Committee will meet virtually at 5 o'clock. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon. We're adjourned.